He also tell me what do I do? How do I switch this off?
Once again, making Alice the co-host. So recording has started. Hello everyone. Welcome to Choe Khor Sum Ling. We're going to start shortly. July 27th today. This morning, we will be continuing the teachings on how to be happy and the practical Buddhism for everyday life. This is a new session, and I'm very grateful that all of you are here. Thank you, Venerable Lekden.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, those who are in person and online. You know, these Sunday morning teachings, we aim for them to be a continuing, ongoing series that is always accessible to everyone, whether they're old-time students or new students. So myself and the other teachers, we try to make sure we don't overlap the topics we teach, but we try to always bring something that is helpful. So in general, for Sunday mornings, if there is some topic that you would like to have discussed, you can mention it to DT or to another volunteer member, and they'll get it back to us, just so you know. So we can try to arrange these teachings to be most useful for everyone. But we don't want to make the Sunday teachings a continuing series. So if new people don't feel like they have to come every single Sunday, we want to make it more open and inviting. So now that we've all gathered, let's take a moment to settle into the space. That includes all of whatever puttering around we've been doing all morning. You know, there's some work here at the center. People have been doing things. Let's put that all aside, not just in our bodies, but also in our minds. Let ourselves be focused on coming together to study the Dharma. Whatever we've been up to all morning, whatever has been weighing on us all week, we can put that to the side for the moment, allow ourselves to be fully present in the space, both the physical space and the emotional space. And as we center ourselves into the space, we can set a very strong motivation that the reason we are studying the teachings of the Buddha, the reason we've come together today, is not simply to benefit ourselves, though we do receive benefit in this life. The reason is so that we can develop the skills, the techniques, the wisdom to be a benefit to others. So we engage in study and practice so we might be able to serve others more fully in this life and in all future lives. And so let that be your very strong motivation for coming here today. May my study and practice of the Dharma, whatever I experience today, and in my practice in general, may that be not for my benefit alone, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. And as you set that motivation strong in your mind, let's offer some prayers to begin. We'll offer the refuge and bodhicitta prayer starting on page 34. I will continue with the normal prayers that I offer. We'll do that first in Tibetan 3 times, and then we will do it in English and continue in English. Sangye Chedan Soki Chonam La Jansho Baru Dagni Kyabsu Ki Dagi Lin Sogi Pe Sonam Gi Chola Pinche Sangye Cho Par Cho Sangye Chedan Soki Chonam La Jansho Baru Dagni Kyabsu Ki Dagi Linso Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Pincher Sange Drupar Shok Sange Churan Soki Chonam La Janjo Baru Dagni Kyapsu Ki Dagi Linso Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Pincher Sange Drupar Shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence, and turn the will of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Then we'll offer a mandala, once in Tibetan and once in English. Generally, a mandala is offered before a teaching session to request the teachings and also to request the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In your daily practice, offering mandala every day, this is to request all the blessings of all the Buddhas, that your practice may be watched over by them in their great compassion, that may continue to show you the path. And so this is a way to make the most supreme of offerings to them. So when we make a mandala offering, we visualize all of existence, right? All the world systems. We purify them so they're perfectly pure. Everything in the space around us becomes emblematic of a perfectly pure Buddha realm. And then we visualize the entire world system, all four continents, Mount Meru at the center, and we offer that to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for the benefit of all sentient beings. So it's a really powerful practice. The short mandala is, a condensed way to do it, but there are more elaborate visualizations that go along if you do a longer mandala offering as well. So I encourage you to engage in that practice regularly. Sangye Shindu Mi Te Ai Joku Ama Shila This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And we'll continue by offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is on page 72, or 73 rather. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced down 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to lessness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed with the ways of aging, sickness, and death. Great, thank you. I'm going to put the chat on so I can see what's going on. Okay. So again, as we begin our session today, I remind everyone that whenever we engage in a Dharma practice, whether it be personal study, or attending a teaching, it is beneficial to bring to mind the 3 faults of a faulty vessel and to do our best to make sure we are not burdened with those faults, that we are free of them. So the first fault is like being a pot or a water vessel that is upside down. So we want to make sure that we are not upside down, which is to say that we are open-minded and that we're receptive. If a pot is upside down, no matter how much water you pour onto it, it's always going to be empty, right? So we need to make sure that we are open-minded, right? And that we come willing to learn. And when this is the same, when you're at home and you're reading a text, this isn't just reading for academic purposes. This isn't reading just for the sake of learning knowledge. It's for learning practice, right? So being open-minded and expansive in this way. We want to be like a pot that isn't upside down. And then the second point is we want to be like a pot that doesn't have a crack in it or a hole. And so if a pot has a hole in it, then no matter how much water you pour in, obviously, it'll all spill out. In the same way, we want to be attentive. Okay? We want to bring our full focus to whatever we're studying and to our practice. So we want to be mindful and attentive. And sometimes that might mean having an extra cup of coffee in the morning, depending on the time of the session. It also means being skillful. And if it's late and it's evening and you're trying to meditate or you're trying to study and you're not getting it because you're too sleepy, then put it down, right? Sometimes you have to say, this isn't the right time for me to be doing this if you're overwhelming yourself. And falling asleep over a Dharma text isn't exactly a good way to accumulate merit, right? So it's being honest with yourself too sometimes. But we don't want to be like a pot that has a crack in it. So we want to be attentive and exert effort and mindful. And lastly, we don't want to be like a pot that is stained. So if a pot has some vestige in it, they usually say a poison. I don't know why you had been keeping poison in the same pot you keep water in, but that is the analogy. If it has poison in it, even if you clean it out, but you leave a little bit in there, once you add the water to it, it's going to be polluted by whatever was in there beforehand, right? And so we don't want to be like that, which is to say we won't want to have preconceptions coming in. And this is especially important, as we begin this study, when you're studying a topic you may have already studied before, especially because you might say, I already know all about this topic, so why should I come study it again, right? Or what benefit is there to me? And if you have that attitude, then there's no benefit to you. right? There's no use. But if you're able to go in without that preconception and say, I may have studied this before, but there's always deeper I can go into the Dharma. So you don't have any preconceptions going in, then that will allow you to get the most out of the teaching. So these are the three attitudes, or the three faults we want to avoid, and then the opposite of them that we want to cultivate. So we want to avoid being like an upside down pot, a pot with a hole in it, and a pot that is stained or polluted. So keeping that in mind, we can attend to the topic today. So tomorrow is Choe Khor Sum, and so Choe Khor Sum is one of the 4 holidays, main holidays in the Tibetan Buddhist calendar, right? And the wheel turning day, as it's called. And so I know some of you attended last night, so you have the sneak peek. But so what are the 4 holidays that are in the Tibetan Buddhist calendar, the main holidays? So let's go in order. That's right, Sakadawa. Let's go in order. So what's the first one? According to the Tibetan calendar. Choe Khor Sum. So that is the Day of Miracles. That's the 15th of the first month. So the first 2 weeks of the year, of the new year, the lunar new year, the Buddha performed miracles every day because he was there were some Tirthakas who challenged him to engage in these miracles. And on the 15th day, we celebrate that as the Day of Miracles, or Choe Khor Sum. That is the 15th of the first month. Then the second is, as mentioned, Sakadawa Duchen, right? Sakadawa Duchen, or Sakadawa. Sakadawa is the 4th month. Sakadawa Duchen, Duchen means holiday or great festival day in Tibetan. Sakadawa Duchen is the 15th day of the 4th month. And that is remembering Buddha's birth, or Buddha's display of birth, as well as enlightenment, as well as passing into parinirvana. All 3 are on the same day. So that is the 15th of the 4th month. And then roughly 7 weeks after that, we have tomorrow, which is Choe Khor Sum, which is the turning of the wheel of Dharma. That's the first sermon. So it's remembering the Buddha's first sermon. And then the last one is
Stairway from Heaven.
right, Labak Duchen, or the descent from the heaven realms. That is on the 22nd of the 9th month. And that is when the Buddha had ascended to the heaven realms to teach his mother, because after she passed away, she was reborn into a heaven realm. And so he ascended into those heaven realms to teach his mother Dharma. And his students here on earth and in this realm requested him to return to continue teaching. And so on the 22nd of the 9th month, he came down and he continued his teaching here. And we often celebrate that almost as like a Mother's Day, right? A Buddhist Mother's Day is how we often celebrate it. What I really appreciate about it is that there was a nun at that time, and she was one of the lead people who was requesting the Buddha to return. I don't know her name. And she wanted to be the first to see him when he returned to our world to teach. And so she disguised herself as a monk, because the nuns would always have to stay behind the monks. So she disguised herself as a monk so she could get at the front. And so when the Buddha descended from the heavenly realm, she was the first one to lay eyes on him. You know, this nun who was like, no, I'm not taking any of this patriarchy nonsense. So that I thought was very nice. So tomorrow is wheel turning day. So it's the anniversary and the celebration of the first teaching of the Buddha, the first sermon of the Buddha. And so there are a couple of things so thinking about that, I thought it'd be good to talk about that a little bit today. You know, the first sermon is where he taught the Four Noble Truths, which is the foundation for all Buddhist philosophical thought. In any school, any country, any culture, it all comes down to the Four Noble Truths. And all of our teachings that we have, we could condense them into the Four Noble Truths. Whether they be intellectual teachings, academic teachings, practice-oriented teachings, they all find space in there. But before we get into that, I think for me, when you hear the story of the Buddha's first sermon, you notice that from when he achieved enlightenment, which is on the 15th of the 4th month, to when he taught the first sermon, the 4th day of the 6th month, there's almost 7 weeks between there where he didn't teach, right? He stayed in meditative equipoise for a while, and then he wandered without teaching, because he felt that, or at least he gave the display, or, you know, we understand that he was already a Buddha, so he has an omniscient mind, but he showed the display of existing in such a way that if he taught, the Dharma is so profound that teaching it, people wouldn't understand it. And therefore, at first he didn't teach. And he waited until he was requested by the gods Brahma and Indra, they say. And at that request is when he agreed to teach. And at that time, the 5 other sadhus who he had been practicing asceticism with, who had turned their backs on him, they met him on the road. And they saw that he had become a Buddha. Just by seeing him, they immediately had great devotion for him. And they realized that he had achieved something. And so his first sermon was to those 5 disciples, or to those 5 previous the people that had practiced with him that became his first 5 disciples. Now, what I really like about that, a couple things. His hesitancy to teach, right? So we said the Buddha obviously was omniscient. So he wasn't really hesitant to teach. He was waiting for the appropriate time. And part of that is being requested to teach, right? He wasn't going and pushing his understanding of the world on other people. So teachers need to be requested to teach. It's really important in the Buddhist tradition. We just don't go around teaching because we think that we deserve to be teaching. I have some knowledge, therefore I'm going to tell you. That's not how it works. And as students, we have to request teachings. If we don't request the teachings, they're not going to come. So it's incumbent on us as students to go out of our way to make requests of the teachers, right? And so he was modeling that he wasn't just going, his goal wasn't just to spread his understanding all around the world, because that isn't an effective way to change people's minds, right? But when you're requested to teach, that is how you then are effective and you're useful. And so he's modeling for us. He's also modeling that the Dharma is complex, right? Just sometimes understanding the words, we don't get it the first time. We have to meditate on it. We have to think about it. It can be confusing sometimes, some of these teachings. So he was showing that he understood that. If it was easy, everyone would be enlightened right away, right? So those two things both stick out to me as important parts of that story. We often gloss over it, right? Because we move right to the teachings, right to the Four Noble Truths. But for me, remembering that he waited until he was requested to teach, that was intentional, right? He could have started teaching right away. He was in Bodh Gaya. There are all these people seeking spiritual guidance in Bodh Gaya, right? He could have found any corner and just started teaching, but he didn't. He waited until he was requested for 7 weeks. And he recognized that this Dharma is so profound that just teaching it right away to anyone, it can be difficult to understand. Not everyone's going to understand it right away. That, for me at least, helps motivate my practice. It helps remind me that I need to constantly be making requests to receive teachings, right? And that I have to be patient with myself when I don't understand everything right away, because even at the time of the Buddha displaying enlightenment, he recognized this is a complicated topic and not everyone's going to understand it. The other part of that story that is motivating to me is that when his 5 fellow practitioners, the 5 sadhus, saw him, right away, they realized that he had achieved something. And I know some of you may have had that experience when you meet a teacher or a person for the first time and you just know something about them, or even not a person, not a teacher necessarily, but you meet someone who's special in some way, who's done some sort of inner work. They may not be Buddhist even, but they've done some sort of inner work. And you meet them and you say, well, there's something about this person that's magnetic. They have a quality about them where I can tell that they're not, they're not fluff. They're not putting on a show. There's something special about them, right? And so they had that. When they saw him, they immediately requested teachings. They immediately took him as a source of refuge. Right? Yesterday, we talked about refuge, the 3 jewels of refuge, what it means to go for refuge. Just seeing him and looking at him, they had the realization that he has achieved something we haven't achieved. And so for me, what that is also inspiring to is, you have to remember, they had turned their backs on him, right? They had rejected him. They said, you're not a true seeker, because he had stopped the extreme asceticism, right? And he had cut his hair and he took a bath in the Naranja River and he ate the rice curd or the milk curd. So they had turned their back on him. And yet when they saw him, they overcame that, which is just that we make mistakes all the time, right? We make mistakes all the time. And yet, even though we make mistakes, we don't have to let our past mistakes hold us back. Okay. So when we make mistakes, we shouldn't then keep making those mistakes over and over again. And if you see something that contradicts how you behaved previously, you shouldn't let your shame or your embarrassment or your guilt, you feeling of how you behaved previously, to stop you from going forward into the right way, right? If they were overwhelmed with their guilt, oh, we turned our backs on him, therefore he's not going to want to teach us, then they wouldn't have been able to receive those teachings, right? So those are both kind of inspiring aspects to me of the story, that he waited until he was requested to teach, and that those first 5 disciples who had turned their backs on him saw him and immediately humbled themselves before him and said, please teach us. We know you've realized something. That is kind of how I want to model my life, my behavior, is that it's also easy for me, like someone who studies at the monastery, my classmates, when they know more than me, it's very competitive at the monastery, as you can imagine, right? We have a competitive attitude. And that's the point of that competition, is that we all can encourage each other to learn more, right? And to become deeper understanding of the material. But it's easy to look at your classmate, especially me. I'm older than all my classmates. I think I have 2 classmates that are my age. The rest are like a decade younger than me. So to look at my classmate who understands a topic or can debate a topic better than me, to be like, please explain this to me. Or I'm going to debate with you because I want you to basically show me what I'm missing,
right? That takes, a humility that isn't easy to do all the time. But when you do it, it benefits you, right? So that humility, I think, is really powerful. And it's an important part of that story as well. So then we can think a little bit about the Four Noble Truths. This is what the Buddha chose to teach first, right? And of all the teachings he taught first, the first one was the truth of suffering, the truth of dissatisfaction. And, the first two truths, he taught what is to be abandoned, right? What aspects of our life that we need to abandon, the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering. And then the way to abandon those things, which is the truth of cessation and the truth of the path, right? That is the way he taught his first sermon. There are many different ways that you can order the four truths. He chose to teach them in that order because in order for us to develop the will to engage in spiritual practice, we have to realize that there's a need for it first, right? It's part of the reason that the God realms are not preferred realms to be reborn into, because they have so much bliss. They don't have enough suffering in their everyday lives that they have any compulsion to engage in spiritual practice, because their lives are too blissed out all the time until the end of their lives when it's too late, right? So we need to realize the state of the world we're in. And now sometimes calling it suffering is very heavy. There are some people that argue that suffering isn't the best translation of the word dukkha, and some like to call it dissatisfaction, other things like this. I think suffering is accurate, but if you interpret the teaching as meaning everything is suffering all the time, then that isn't the right way to interpret the teaching. So I think it's less about the language and more about the explanation. But when we study suffering or dissatisfaction, that shouldn't be depressing, right? What that should be is revelatory. It should open our eyes to the world around us and to our place in the world, and then motivate us to then want to do better, want to engage in the world in a more meaningful way, to assess our lives and say, these are the ways my life lines up with this teaching, and these are the things that still are kind of, maybe I don't agree with it. That's a place for inquiry, right? We're encouraged to be skeptical, and these are things that I need to work on. So it is encouraging us to, instead of being depressed, to look forward and say, how can I be free from this? Right? So in general, I'm not going to go into all of the four truths too deeply, but with the truth of suffering, usually when it's taught, it's first taught the coarse suffering, right? And for the examples of the coarse suffering, we often look at the suffering of the three lower realms. So the hell realms, who are pervaded by physical pain, and the hungry ghost realms, which are pervaded by desire and wanting and thirst and grasping, and the animal realms, which are pervaded by fear and ignorance, right? Those are all really coarse types of suffering. So that those are examples in some degree of the suffering of suffering, right? Physical pain, physical illness. And that kind of suffering we can't avoid, right? As we're born in samsara, we're born as human beings. We're going to experience old age, sickness, and death. Like that is inevitable, right? The difference is going to be whether or not we allow that physical type of suffering to precipitate emotional suffering. But we can't avoid those. We can avoid all of the emotional suffering that comes from them, but we can't avoid getting old, getting sick, and dying. And then we have the suffering of change, which is a more subtle type of suffering. That's the one I talk about the most. And that is recognizing that many of the things that we take as happiness, anything that we label as worldly happiness, is actually a type of suffering. It's the transformation of one state of being to another, right? If we're really hot and we jump into a cold lake, that experience of cold is going to feel like bliss and happiness, but it's really just trading the suffering of heat for the suffering of cold. And in that moment, it feels good, and we can appreciate that. But if we're grasping onto that feeling of cold as actual happiness, we're going to be disillusioned quite quickly, right? So the reason this is important is not because I want us to be unhappy all the time and say everything is suffering, there is no happiness. But it's if I look at worldly happiness and understand it for what it is, then I can actually appreciate it. When I expect worldly happiness to be something other than what it is, then I'm going to be disappointed, right? That's the important part of it. Not that I should never experience joy or bliss. It's that I have to accept it for what it is and not superimpose other ideas upon it that it's not ever going to be able to live up to, right? It's about managing your expectations in some way. And then there's the more subtle suffering, that the very fact that we have the capacity to suffer is itself a type of suffering. The suffering, the all-pervasive suffering, and the suffering of all compounded phenomena. And that is just the state of our being in samsara. Until we are free from samsara, until we achieve moksha or nirvana, then we are going to have that type of suffering. Just the very fact that we have the capacity to suffer. So that is taught first, and it's quite important. Right? But then, for anyone able to get too depressed, you teach that there is a cause to suffering. And the important thing about understanding there's a cause to suffering is that, one, it sets you apart from other traditions where, say, your suffering is being given to you by outside of you. There's some God, there's some judge, there's some creator being who is causing you to suffer. It takes that away and says, no, your suffering is due to actions you've done in the past. So you don't have to feel persecuted because you're not persecuted. There is no judge, there is no omnipotent being who is causing you to suffer. So you don't feel like a victim in that way. Instead, it allows you to take control over your own experience and say that your suffering comes from karma and delusion, right? Which are the karma that you've created in the past is what causes your experiences in this life. And your actions in this life are what are creating karma to precipitate your experiences in future lives. And the delusions, starting with the three root delusions of ignorance and attachment and anger. And from them, especially from ignorance, we develop self-grasping. And then from self-grasping, self-cherishing. From self-cherishing, all of these harmful minds. And those are what perpetuate our suffering again and again. And they are what cause us to not understand the nature of reality. That we mistake reality for the kind of hallucinations that we superimpose onto reality. And since we act with regard to those superimpositions instead of the actual way things exist, we create unhappiness for ourselves. But the importance of knowing that is that if we don't know it, how can we ever do anything about it? So then at that point, you say, well, okay, now I know the suffering exists, and I'm clued into how miserable everything is when I used to think I was happy. Now I'm clued in that I'm miserable, and I'm clued into the fact that it's my own fault. So what's next? Well, then you say, well, there's a way to end it. There is a cessation of suffering. Like you, as an individual, have the capacity to be free from all suffering, right? It isn't hopeless. It's never hopeless. Yes, your own karma and delusions are what cause the experience of suffering you have right now in this life. But you have the ability to end it because for every sentient being, we have the capacity to become Buddhist. And therefore, the cessation of suffering, the truth of cessation, is the next thing that is taught. Now, in our tradition, the truth of cessation, it actually is emptiness. The actual truth of cessation is emptiness. Okay? The actual nature of all reality. But when it's taught in a conventional way, we understand the truth of cessation means cessation of suffering. And the reason it's emptiness is because it's meditation on emptiness, meditative equipoise on emptiness, actually having direct realization to the nature of all reality that serves as the antidote for our afflicted emotions, right? For all of the delusions and their imprints. It's having realization of the nature of reality that serves as the actual antidote. And so that's why cessation, the truth of cessation, is itself emptiness. Though when we talk about it in conventional ways, there's other aspects to it that we can talk about conventionally. But the actual nature of the truth of cessation is the nature of reality, which is that it is the ultimate truth. Right? And then that's only useful to know if we have a path to get there. And that is the path, the truth of the path. And so that is the last part of the sermon. How to achieve that cessation. Now, I should say that we call these the Four Noble Truths. And that is not a great translation because the truths themselves aren't noble, right? Noble mean Arya. They are true to they appear true to a person who has achieved the state of an Arya being. So to a noble being or an Arya being, someone who has realized the true nature of reality, these four things are true. That is why they're the noble truths. They're the truths to an Arya or for an Arya. That is why they're called that. But the translation, we label the truths as noble. The truths themselves aren't noble. They are true to a being who has realized the nature of reality. And so when we talk about the fourth truth, the truth of the path, there are different ways to explain this. And one of the common ways that I want to talk about for the bulk of our class today is the Eightfold Path. We don't talk about that a lot in the Tibetan tradition because there are other ways to look at that truth and other ways to encompass all the teachings of the path. But I want to talk about the Eightfold Path today. And again, the Eightfold Path is called the Noble Eightfold Path. But again, that word noble is saying it's the Paktam Yen Lake, Pakpe Lam Yen Lake. It is the Eightfold Path that appears for a person who has achieved the realization of emptiness, which is to say an Arya being which is to say a noble person. Noble is a translation of the word Arya. I don't know if it's a great translation, but that's where it comes from. So this Eightfold Path itself isn't, we're not describing that as noble, though you could, but here the term noble is referencing the people who experience this path, or the types of beings who recognize the validity of it. So, the Buddha said, anyone who recognizes dependent origination or sees dependent origination sees the Dharma. And anyone who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. And what that means is not that they see the Buddha's body, but that they see the awakened mind, right? The full realization of all of our capacities. All of us have the capacity to become Buddhas, right? We all have that. All sentient beings do. And when you see the Buddha, what you are really seeing is the Buddha mind, the awakened mind, the complete realization of that capacity that every sentient being shares. And you see that Buddha, the complete realization of the omniscient mind, the awakened mind, by seeing the Dharma. And you see the Dharma by understanding dependent origination or dependent arising, right? And so when we try to understand the Eightfold Path, we have to understand that what we're looking at when we look at this teaching is the Dharma. And by looking at the Dharma, it's bringing us closer to Buddhahood. And I'll get back to this idea of the dependent origination a little later, I think. But when you look at the, one of the quotes from the Kadampa Geshe is when you're studying renunciation, it says, now is the time to distinguish yourself from cattle, right? And what that means is, how are our lives different than the lives of animals, right? We say dumb, ignorant animals. If we live our lives without focusing on a spiritual practice of any sort, then are we really any better than dumb, ignorant animals? And the answer is probably not, maybe even worse, because we have the ability to do much more harm than animals do in general, right? Because we have this ability we have this intelligence and this ability to engage in philosophical thought and spiritual practice that animals don't. And so to waste that opportunity is a crime, right? And so when you look at the Dharma path and how difficult it may be, you just have to remember, this is the chance for me to distinguish myself from cattle. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to become Buddha tomorrow, but it means that I'm exerting effort and using everything at my disposal to engage in a spiritual practice. And that doesn't have to contradict with my worldly life. It doesn't mean you have to join a monastery or go to a cave and retreat or do any of these things. It just means that you have to commit yourself to making your life meaningful, right? Finding those aspects of your mind and of your practice that bring meaning to your life, which is going to find its root in being of service to others and getting rid of your own self-grasp, getting rid of your ego. Those are the two things, right, that are going to be the most meaningful. That's how we make our lives most meaningful. But so when we look at this practice of the Eightfold Path, that offers us a chance to be elevated outside of the status of cattle or dogs, and instead recognize that as human beings, we have this capacity. So the truth of the path is often, so I'm going to talk about the Eightfold Path, but it's often, the Eightfold Path can be condensed into the three higher trainings, and both the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition condense it into the three higher trainings. So those are often described instead of the Eightfold Path. And then in the Sanskrit tradition and the Mahayana tradition, we also more often talk about the three principal aspects of the path. And we can also condense the Eightfold Path into those. So that's why you don't see the Eightfold Path taught as frequently in these traditions, because we teach either the three higher trainings and or the three principal aspects of the path. And all of the teaching, or Lamrim, in the Gelug tradition especially, we teach Lamrim. And all of the teachings that we're going to go through today in the Eightfold Path, they fall into those categories as well, right? So it's just a matter of structuring how you want to talk about the ways of practice. Now, the thing about the Eightfold Path, and this goes for many other things, is that it's not sequential. So we're going to go through them in order, and they're taught in a specific order, especially the first one, or the first two, for a reason, but we don't practice them. And the same with the Lamrim. We don't have to practice the first one and complete it 100%, then we move on to the second, and then we move on to the third, like that. No, it's a holistic approach, right? It's a way of looking at our whole practice. And we create these distinctions because we have to understand the different roles they play and the different aspects of our mind and of our practice. But it's not like we have to do one at a time. we really should be doing all of them at the same time. Now, in our daily meditation practice, you might choose to focus on one of these aspects to make yourself more familiar with it in your daily practice. And then maybe, one day you focus on one, the next day you focus on another, like that in your meditation session. But throughout your daily life, you should be doing all of them at the same time, or attempting to, right? So first, let's very quickly, what are the Eightfold Path? What are the 8 steps? Let's try to go in order. Right view is first, then right thought, sometimes translated as right intention, but it's really tokpa, so intention is a little bit misleading. So right view, then right thought, and then not quite yet.
Mindfulness.
Not quite yet.
Livelihood.
Not quite yet. Wait, right before right action is
Intention.
right speech, right? Right speech, and then right action, and then right livelihood. And then 3 more.
Mindfulness.
Not quite. One more before that.
Concentration.
Nope, that's last. So we've got 7 and 8. We're just missing 6.
Could be wisdom.
Okay, and no, we're not used to it.
Behavior.
No, we got behavior already.
Thinking.
No, we got thinking. Effort, right effort. Okay, right effort. So right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, then right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So let's go through those. Now, the Pali tradition, the way they're taught, and the way it's taught in the Sanskrit tradition is mostly the same, though especially the first 2 are taught differently, have different meanings. But we don't, we accept the teachings of the Pali tradition as useful, but then we add on to it what it really means, quote unquote. So I'm going to do both. I'm going to talk about both here because they're both useful for our practice. Yeah. So right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And so we start with right view. And now right view, at the base level, we look at right view as being the opposite of wrong view, right? And when we're trying to abandon wrong views, what are we referencing specifically? We're referencing, there are a few different types of wrong view, but the most common one is a lack of belief in karma and the effects of karma, and a lack of belief in the validity of the 3 jewels as the only source of refuge. But those are the 2 biggest ones when we talk about wrong view. That if we hold those wrong views, then those are heavy wrong views, right? And there are other wrong views we can look at that are, prioritizing asceticism as a type of spiritual goal over other types. And there are a number of different types of wrong view, but those are the 2 we most mainly talk about, right?
The first one.
Not believing in karma and the results of karma, and not believing the 3 jewels of refuge are authentic sources of refuge, and that there are no other authentic sources of refuge other than them. Those are the 2 most commonly talked about. There are a lot of them, right? So when we look at right view in view of that, then we say right view is accepting the teachings of the Buddha as authentic, as the authentic path to Buddhahood, as the authentic path to liberation, right? We look at, we talk about liberation and Buddhahood, and they're not quite the same, right? So Buddhahood, so liberation is often described as achieving fearlessness. It's when you're able to be free from all of the afflicted minds and the seeds of the afflicted minds, all of the afflictive obscurations. That is achieving nirvana, achieving moksha, also known achieving fearlessness. But achieving Buddhahood is not only have you become free of the afflictive obscurations, but also of the cognitive obscurations. So the imprints, right, that still trap you in samsara, that still trap your mind, that serve as obstacles to omniscience. And so Buddhahood is infinite happiness and omniscience that is on top of the fearlessness of achieving freedom from samsara, right? So when we talk about Buddhahood, we talk about both fearlessness and infinite happiness, right? Moksha, or liberation, is really only liberation from samsara. It's a lesser liberation than the liberation of Buddhahood, which is called the liberation, non-abiding nirvana. So sometimes when I talk, when I say liberation, I'm really referencing Buddhahood, because that is the supreme liberation. So I may not always say that, but it's worth to know that when you study, especially when you study the 5 paths and the 3 vehicles, that the result of the 2 lower vehicles, of the Shravaka vehicle and the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, those beings have direct realizations of the nature of reality, and they're able to eliminate all afflictive obscurations and achieve arhathood, but they aren't Buddhas yet, so they still have to get rid of the cognitive obscurations. The biggest cognitive obscuration that we talk about is the dualistic appearance that we have, right? So they may not, an arhat isn't trapped by that dualistic appearance. They understand the nature of reality, but they still have a dualistic appearance. Things still appear to them that in a way that's discordant with how they actually exist. Yet they have enough realization to not be overwhelmed or trapped by that appearance, but they still have that appearance, right? The example they gave is if you have a cloth that's really well stained, that's really stained, you may clean it perfectly and wash it out entirely, yet there's still some stain there that you can never clean out. That subtle stain. Or sometimes they use something that's like a really strong smell, like garlic or onion, that if you have a plate that you serve a meal that has a lot of garlic and onion, then you might get rid of all that garlic and onion and wash that plate. There's no atoms of garlic or onion left in that plate, but it still has that smell of garlic and onion, right? Because that trace element, right? So those are how we look at the cognitive obscurations. They're very, very subtle, right? They're not actually minds. They are imprints that lead to different types of experience. So right view is accepting the teachings of the Buddha, that they are going to lead us to liberation as well as Buddhahood, that they are the validity of the teaching of emptiness and the validity of the teaching of karma and so forth. And so yeah, go ahead.
There are many people in the West who are Buddhists but don't believe in, or don't say that they have no belief, I suppose, in karma.
Mhm.
And they are, I think one of them is Stephen Batchelor.
Stephen Batchelor, Buddhism without beliefs, yeah.
Yeah. And he, I mean, no one, I don't know, do people tell him, because he writes and, he's very...
yeah, he's one of these people that's promoting this idea of secular Buddhism, and it's helpful to people, so that's great. From the hardline point of view, we'd say that he doesn't have refuge. He isn't Buddhist. If you don't believe in karma and its results, then you can't actually accept the Dharma jewel as a refuge. And so you're not accepting Dharma jewel as a refuge. And therefore, he doesn't have a complete mind of refuge. And therefore, if you don't have a complete mind of refuge, then you're not a Buddhist. Yet, he's still taking the Buddhist teachings and finding huge benefit to them in his life. And he's sharing them in a way where many people are able to access them and get benefit from them, right? And so if he chooses to call himself a Buddhist, then that's just a label. And it doesn't really affect my practice of Buddhism, right? But so if you don't believe in karma, then you can't have a complete mind of refuge in the Dharma jewel, right? Okay. Yeah. Which isn't to say you're a bad person. Again, that's the beauty of the teachings of the Buddha, is that we can take them and find benefit in them, even if we aren't Buddhist, right?
And I'm always struck by how no one in the Buddhist, world has told him, shut up, go away, don't write. I mean,
yeah, because he's benefiting people. He's helping people. And also, if I were to say, hey, you're not really a Buddhist, don't write these things, he's not going to listen to me. It's just going to create dissension, right? I mean, there's no real skill. If there was a skillful way to do that, then maybe people would. But most likely there isn't a very skillful way. And he is benefiting people. There are people that, the thing about the West, there are people that have no interest in Buddhism as a religion, but they are interested in some of the philosophical ideas. And for those of us that practice it, we realize that to separate the philosophy and the soteriology, the religious aspects and the philosophical aspects, is a mistake, right? Like, you can't separate them and have the full benefit, but there's still some benefit, right? Even doing daily mindfulness meditation and nothing else is a huge benefit. And so if you say, I'm going to watch my breath every day for 15 minutes, that makes me a Buddhist. Who cares what you call yourself? The fact that you're taking time out of your day to look at your mind is revolutionary in this day and age. You know what I mean? So And if the Buddhist teachings can't withstand one random academic calling things Buddhism that aren't true Buddhism, then they don't really deserve the place they deserve, right? Like there are much greater threats to the teachings of the Buddha before contemporary academics started writing books, right? So I will say for me, like when I was a new Buddhist, I would be so frustrated by people that like Stephen Batchelor or just people that practiced like what I thought of as like pop spirituality but called themselves Buddhists. Because I was like, I'm not like you. I'm a real Buddhist. I don't want to be mixed with you. I don't want people to think that I'm like you. But that was my ego. It has nothing to do with them, right? And whatever they called themselves doesn't affect my ability to practice. It doesn't affect my access to the teachings, right? So that was all my ego and saying, I want to feel like I'm better than them because my path is more pure, quote unquote. And so I realized that it was all me, right? So anything that benefits sentient beings is useful.
Venerable, is it okay? Basically, as we use Stephen Batchelor's translation of Shantideva's book, like, so it's okay. Our teachers say it's okay, so we use it. So I mean, I just go by that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, also
standardly accept that is.
Well, his translation of Shantideva's way of life came, I believe, before he kind of renounced the belief of Buddhism, because he was a monk for many years, right? And he first started Korean Buddhism, I believe, and then he found Tibetan Buddhism, and he was a monk for a while, and then he did all this academic work, and then at some point he had this revelation that he didn't like all of the religious aspects of it, and he like cut ties with it. But he's still a great translator, So his translation of that text is one of the common ones to use. That's fun. It's very fun. And like his teachings, like his big famous book is, he has two books that are really famous. I mean, maybe I haven't, in the last 20 years, I haven't really paid attention, so maybe there are new ones. But Buddhism Without Beliefs and Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist are the two books that like are most popular of his. And if they are able to help people, then great. Like, because there are people that will never listen to me teach. They'll never attend a Dharma center. They'll never go somewhere where it has any of the trappings of religion, just because of their experiences. Like there are people that are like that. And so if he's able to reach them, then that's great. It's not, if he was actively harming people, that'd be different. But he isn't, he's reaching people that I'm not going to reach. So I think that's fun.
I think when you're saying this, what I'm realizing is that I tend to use, such stuff to feed my, it makes me shaky. It makes me, oh, he's saying this, then what am I, and he's a respected figure, and whatever I read, makes sense. So I use it to, I think, fuel my doubt, which is, I suppose, not.
Well, it's useful. It's useful if it allows you to then do more work to then develop more confidence, right? Because from doubt allows introspection, which then builds your own confidence. That like, I actually do understand how this works in my life, and this is meaningful to me, even if he dismisses it for these reasons. So if you're able to use it in that way, it can be useful. But if you don't get past that middle step and it just makes you more doubtful, then maybe you shouldn't be, it's not a useful thing to engage with. So you have to look at your own practice and your own mind and see. But so, okay, we got a little bit off topic. We're on right view. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay,
How is the Buddhist
hold on a second. This is really quiet. I don't know if I can turn this volume up a little bit. Sorry. Nope. Okay, maybe see if you, uh-oh.
Am I audible?
Oh, I have you now. Good, great. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, how is a Buddhist defined? I studied it as a Buddhist is defined as someone who takes refuge in the three jewels and has no other refuge.
That's the most common way for defining a Buddhist. Yeah. Someone who has accepted the three tools of refuge as the only authentic sources of refuge and has a mind of refuge for them. Yeah. That's the most common definition. And we say that, when you study refuge, that is one of the benefits of refuge is you become Buddhist, quote unquote. Right. There are other people that argue that to become a Buddhist, you have to accept the four seals. And there's a whole debate because there's one school of Hinayana Buddhism that doesn't exist anymore. But after the time of the Buddha, there's one school that doesn't accept selflessness the way the rest of us do. So then there's a debate if they're real Buddhists or not, because they don't accept the four seals completely. So that's like an intellectual debate, right? But the common definition that we use that is accepted is that accepting the three jewels of refuge as authentic sources and accepting that there are no authentic sources outside of them. Exactly.
We have a question. When it comes to the first refuge, taking refuge in the Buddha, now since the historical Shakyamuni Buddha, I mean, pardon my ignorance, but he doesn't exist, right, in Right. So
No, what do you mean?
I mean, he doesn't exist in the world, right?
You mean now or
yeah,
ever?
Physically. I mean, he existed maybe
Yeah.
2,500
Yeah,
years.
he doesn't exist now, correct?
Doesn't exist now. So when you say you're taking refuge in the historical Shakyamuni Buddha, what does it mean? Like, does he, example, in the Christian tradition, it's believed that Jesus is in heaven, so you can commune with him in heaven. So when it's said that you take refuge in the historical Buddha, what does it really mean? Where is the Buddha present somewhere in some other realm that you take refuge in him, or what exactly is meant by that?
Well, again, this is going to be different depending on the Buddhist tradition you're part of, right? So as the Tibetan tradition, we believe that Shakyamuni Buddha and the essence of Shakyamuni Buddha is found in all Buddhas, right? There are a pantheon of Buddhas that exist all the time. And that is not agreed to, like not all Buddhist traditions accept that kind of idea. So we say that Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Shakyamuni Buddha, he was a Buddha before he came to earth. He took the aspect of going through the process of developing Buddhahood for our benefit. And we take refuge in him because he was the Buddha who descended to Zambuling, to our earth, to our realm, in order to teach the Dharma, right? So our refuge in him, in the Buddha, is both the refuge in Shakyamuni Buddha, but it's also expansive enough to include all Buddhas and to include our own teachers, right? Because we place an importance on our lamas or our gurus. But for Shakyamuni Buddha himself, we use him as the example because he's the one that demonstrated the importance of the Dharma in the world in this current epoch, right? And so we take refuge in him as a historical figure, recognizing that he is the one that brought the Dharma and made it accessible to all of us. But even though he doesn't exist now, we still see representations of him, and we accept that as the founder who represented these teachings. And so that is kind of the universal way. And then from the Tibetan side, we also say all of the other Buddhas that exist share the same Buddha mind, or they don't share one mind, but the Buddha mind is indifferentiable, is Yermepa, it is indistinguishable. One Buddha mind from another Buddha mind in that way. So that mind of enlightenment, the complete omniscience that Buddha Shakyamuni manifested and displayed for us, is the same Buddha mind or the same flavor Buddha mind as all the other Buddhas that exist. And so when we take refuge in the Buddha, we're taking refuge in all the Buddhas in that way, and in the enlightened mind itself.
So at present, does the historical Shakyamuni Buddha exist in some other realm, like in the Christian traditions believe that Jesus
in like Buddha Shakyamuni. We say there is a pure realm that Buddha Shakyamuni resides in.
So he's presently residing in that realm.
But he doesn't, I mean, whether or not he takes the aspect that looks like Buddha Shakyamuni is neither here nor there. Once you achieve the state of, once you're a Bodhisattva, and especially an Arya Bodhisattva, you're able to create countless emanations, right? And so we could say that the Buddha Shakyamuni exists here in this room as this table. Like it's possible. I very highly doubt it. But the Buddha Shakyamuni can manifest any way he wants, right? So the fact that he exists, it means that continuum of mind that manifested as Shakyamuni Buddha, as Prince Gautama, who then went through the aspects of achieving enlightenment. That continuum of mind still does exist, right? Because we say our mental continuums never cease. They don't ever cease. They just change how they exist in the world. But so we look at the two continuums, the continuum of mind and the continuum of our bodies. And obviously the physical continuum, that ceases, right? But the mental continuum never ceases. And so the mental continuum that manifests as Shakyamuni Buddha does still exist in a pure realm somewhere, that he is teaching disciples that have the karma to be reborn in that pure realm. But that isn't really useful for us, right? What's useful for us is the teachings he gave in this realm. And so when we take refuge in the image of him that we take refuge in is of Shakyamuni Buddha as he manifests in this realm, in this time period, because that's what's most beneficial for us, right? And then, when we study refuge, we only look at the Buddha Dharma Sangha. For the Tibetans, the Lama is also incorporated. The Lama is the embodiment of all three jewels of refuge, right? And anything we talk about with the relation to the Buddha jewel, we also think of our Lama in that same way, of our Guru in that same breath. Which is why, like when we do prostrations, we have 4 points that we use for our prostrations. The top of the head is representing prostration to the Guru. And then the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha in that way. It's one of the sources of imagery for our prostration. But so Buddha Shakyamuni's mental continuum, or the mental continuum that manifests as Buddha Shakyamuni, does exist in a pure realm, in a Buddha realm. But okay, so sorry, we got off topic. We're still on number 1, right view. Now, the Sanskrit traditional way of understanding right view isn't, we agree with all of that. That is all right view, that we should, the opposite of disbelief in karma and so forth. And we need to cultivate all those as an important part of our path. But specifically, we look at right view as a correct understanding of emptiness and the correct understanding of emptiness that happens in the mind of meditative equipoise. Right? So the Sanskrit tradition actually looks at the eight branches of this Eightfold Path, and it divides them into 4 categories. Right? So the first category is called the branch of affirmation. And the only of the 8, the only one that's included in that is right view. Right view makes up the entirety of the branch of affirmation. And what that is it affirming the nature of reality. So when you're in meditative equipoise, all that appears to a mind in meditative equipoise is the lack of true existence, which is the ultimate truth. So the right view in the Sanskrit tradition and the Mahayana tradition is recognizing the true nature of reality that appears to a mind in meditative equipoise on emptiness. And that's why it's called the branch of affirmation, because it is affirming the nature of reality. And then the second of the 8 is right thought, sometimes translated as right intention. And so in the Pali tradition and in the Theravada tradition, right thought is often equated or understood as being renunciation. And so it is the thought with which you go about your practice. It is understanding things correctly and having the correct motivation to go about engaging in your Dharma practice. And we say renunciation is incredibly important. That's one of the 3 principal aspects of the path, right? And so when we think about renunciation in this regard and think about proper intention, it's sometimes translated as intention, though I don't think that's a good translation of the word tokpa. But it is the mental activity that is concomitant with behaving or following a spiritual ideal. Now, in the Sanskrit tradition, in our tradition, we say that actually what right thought is referencing ultimately, the not the conventional reference, but the ultimate reference of right thought is the recognition of emptiness outside of meditative equipoise. So when you're in meditative equipoise, all that appears to a mind in meditative equipoise is emptiness. Nothing else exists. No conventional phenomena exists to a mind in meditative equipoise. But when you leave that meditation session and you are in the rest of your life, right, you still have to have the recognition of emptiness. And you have to see how that emptiness that you're meditating on is then infiltrates all of your experiences of the world. And so it's the recognition of emptiness in your everyday life and in the phenomena you experience outside of your meditation practice. So specifically outside of meditative equipoise, but for those of us that aren't actually on a path yet, we may not have achieved meditative equipoise, but even we can say in our little baby meditations on emptiness, if you do a retreat and you have like 4 sessions of meditation a day, they say the most important part of your retreat aren't your meditation sessions. It's the time between meditation sessions, because that's when it's hardest to guard your mind. In a meditation session, it's pretty easy to guard your mind. When you finish that session, you get off your seat, and now you have a couple hours to kill before your next meditation session. That's, Lama Zopa referred to that once, I think, as the visa to the hell realms, if you're not careful, because it's very easy in between sessions to just give up everything you've done in the session, right? So right thought here is recognizing the importance of emptiness and how it is useful to engage in the world outside of our meditation practice.
So you mean in day-to-day life?
Yeah, so for our experiences, that means day-to-day life. What is actually the actual reference is for people that have achieved realization of emptiness, because again, the Pakpe Yanlake, Paklam Yanlake, so this is the path, the Eightfold Path for Arya beings who have achieved meditative equipoise on emptiness. So the ultimate meaning of this is for those Arya beings, in their moments when they're not in meditative equipoise, their understanding and application of that understanding of emptiness. For the way we relate it to our life is how we use our understanding of emptiness in our everyday life, outside of our meditation practice. So yes, that's what it means for us. Does that make sense? So again, the Noble Eightfold Path is the Eightfold Path that is practiced by Arya beings, right? By noble beings, quote unquote. And so for them, they already have a realization of emptiness. And so they engage in meditative equipoise on emptiness. And so outside of that meditative equipoise, they have what are called subsequent attainments, is the name of what kind of mind they rest in when they're not meditating. And so specifically, we're looking at like the textbook definition of this. It's for those Arya beings, when they're not in meditative equipoise, the way they understand and apply their understanding of emptiness. For us, since we don't have an understanding of emptiness that's direct, it is, as you're saying, how we take our understanding of emptiness and apply it to our everyday life and how we live in the world, right? And so the This is called the branch that promotes understanding in others. So it's the branch that promotes the understanding of emptiness in others. So again, we divide these into 4 branches, right? The first branch is the branch of affirmation, branch that affirms the way reality exists. And then this is the branch promoting understanding in others. So when you're not in meditative equipoise and you're living your everyday life, then you are promoting the understanding of emptiness in all that you do in the world, for yourself and for others.
So this could mean things like striving to give up self-cherishing, clinging. So that's how you would take it into, even though you don't have, I mean, you're not a noble person.
Yeah.
If you have to practice it in
there are a lot of ways. So engaging in a practice of renunciation, trying to get rid of self-cherishing, trying to abandon self-grasping as well. Those are all ways to do it. But it's also just looking at your mind when you engage, when the way that a misunderstanding of emptiness and a self-grasping and grasping at phenomena as if they truly exist, how does that cause other disturbances in your mind? So the act of actually looking at that, looking at your grasping mind, looking at your mind of attachment, your minds of anger, and seeing how they come from grasping at things as if they truly exist. And so only by understanding emptiness can you realize that, well, the reason I'm angry about this is because I believe this truly exists. I have an implicit understanding this truly exists, and therefore I develop a superimposition of frustration or discord against it, right? And so by understanding emptiness, you're able to look at that. And so bringing your understanding of emptiness, whether it be academic or realized, whatever level of understanding we have, bringing that into how we go about our everyday life and letting that motivate our practice is the right thought for our practice, for our purposes. And that's why it's called promoting correct understanding in others, because it's also a way of displaying how understanding emptiness affects your whole life. So those 2 are the ones that are the most different from the Pali tradition. The only other one that's different is right speech. So now we're on to the third one, right speech. And so technically, right speech in the Sanskrit tradition is giving teachings of emptiness. That's what right speech is, okay? That is like the ultimate definition of right speech, is teaching about the nature of reality to other beings. But the conventional understanding of right speech is shared entirely with the Pali tradition, and that has 2 aspects, what to avoid and what to adopt. And so as you can imagine, what to avoid is avoiding the 4 non-virtues of speech, right? So lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle gossip or idle talk. So avoiding those and then adopting their opposite, adopting speech that's meaningful, adopting speech that benefits others is what it means to engage in right speech. And then especially with a focus on speech that is teaching the nature of reality to others, to whatever extent we're able to. Then after right speech is right action. And so from here on, the rest of these are more or less shared entirely between the Hinayana traditions and the Mahayana traditions. So there's no division. So right action is following the 10 virtuous activities, right? And avoiding all harmful activities, all of the non-virtuous activities, right? Especially those of body in terms of right action. So we're avoiding killing, sexual misconduct, and stealing, as well as consuming intoxicants. Those are the ones that are stressed mostly, but any wrong action in the body is what is taught that we're trying to avoid. And again, like right speech, it says 2 aspects, what to avoid and what to adopt. And what to adopt is generally the opposite of what to avoid, right? So using our bodies and our physical actions in such a way that benefits others, whatever that may be, depending on the circumstances we're in, right? And then right livelihood. There are 2 different ways to understand right livelihood. There is right livelihood in terms of monastic and then in terms of lay people. So for a monastic, right livelihood is that you avoid the 5 types of wrong livelihood when you're seeking out the 4 things that are requisite for life. So the 4 things that are the 4 requisites are food, clothing, shelter, and medicine, we say. And so whatever a monastic does to acquire the 4 requisites of food, clothing, shelter, and medicine, we don't engage in any of the 5 wrong livelihoods to do that. And the 5 wrong livelihoods as taught for monastics are flattery, or they're all types of manipulation, right? So the first one is flattery, as you can imagine. So I go to a sponsor and I say, oh, you can imagine how if I want something from someone, you lay on charm, right? So that is a wrong type of livelihood. The next one is, make sure I go in order, hinting. Hinting, saying, oh, it would be nice, I do have some water bowls, but it would be really nice if I had a nicer set of them, don't you think? I could make them such nicer offerings, right? That is a type of wrong livelihood for a monastic, right? So flattery, hinting, exchanging something small for something big, right? Being a hypocrite, using hypocrisy to gain something, to gain one of those four, especially because we're talking mainly about achieving those four things. And then lastly, putting someone in a position where they aren't able to say no, right? Whether you're pressuring them in front of other people or whatever it may be, guilting them into it. So those 5 things are considered the 5 wrong livelihoods for a monastic or for an ordained person, right? Using flattery, using hinting, exchanging a small thing for a big thing, using being a hypocrite or hypocrisy, and putting someone in a situation where they aren't able to say no. Really, they're all ways of deceit. They're all types of lies, right? They're all ways of manipulating the situation. So in order for an ordained person to achieve the 4 requisites that we need to live, which is to say, again, food, clothing, shelter, and medicine, which is what the same requisites for everyone, really. But ideally, as an ordained person, you shouldn't have anything besides those, right? I mean, don't go to the monastery and tell the monks that, and don't look at all the smartphones. We can ignore those for, hypothetically, we shouldn't have anything besides those 4. When the way we go about achieving or acquiring those 4 should be pure and avoid those 5. So that is how it is understood for monastics. But those same 5 apply to everyone, right? That what you're looking to achieve and acquire in your life should never be stained with those 5. Whether you're looking to achieve one of the 4 requisites, your own food, clothing, shelter, or medicine, or anything else you're hoping to gain, if you gain it by one of those 5, by some sort of manipulation, then that is the opposite of right livelihood. Then the other definition of right livelihood that more applies to lay people, or more explicitly, is to not engage in a livelihood that causes harm, right? And so the traditional one is obviously don't be a butcher, don't engage in anything that causes you to have to lie, to have to steal.
Fisherman.
Yeah, a fisherman, anything that takes life, but any type of livelihood where you make a living off of causing harm to others, either physical harm or mental harm or emotional harm, any living that requires you to lie or engage in any non-virtuous activity would be a wrong livelihood. So there are a number of examples of them we can think of, and you could argue that there are arguments to be made for being a banker could be a wrong livelihood, right? Or being a CEO of a tech company could be a wrong livelihood. It's possible. The Buddha didn't talk about those. He talked about not being a butcher, right? But you have to look at any job you do and say, what is the purpose of this job? And am I able to do this job completely and wholeheartedly without causing harm? And if there's something about that livelihood that requires you to cause harm or to lie or to be manipulative and to engage in any non-virtuous activity, then that job itself is going to have an aspect that is not considered right livelihood. And sometimes we don't have a choice, right? So then we say, well, this is what I have to do for my life. This is what I'm trained in. This is all I can do. And I have a family I have to take care of, whatever. So then you say, okay, even if my livelihood that I have, if I'm not able, due to circumstances, to not be engaged in this livelihood, how can I do it in the most virtuous way possible? How can I bring about a mind of compassion to motivate what I do and try to minimize the harm I cause? At least we can try to do that, And again, we're not perfect.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I don't know
That's
how
okay.
else to. So with regards to flattery, when we're working in a team, when we are working together with other people, sometimes people do things that are not helpful. So when we express that, it turns into a conflict. And sometimes being honest turns into a huge conflict. So there I prefer to just be silent. I'm very confused. What is the difference between flattery and divisive speech and appreciation? I really appreciate what someone did, and I praise them. Is that flattery, or how do I know?
When you praise them, are you doing it for the purpose of expecting them to give you something? That's what we mean by flattery. So at least in this regard, and I say as a monastic especially, I should avoid flattery. What it means is not complimenting someone or praising someone for their good deeds, or whether it be worldly good deeds or whatever, spiritual good deeds. But it's I'm praising you for the purpose of expecting you to give me something, right? So that is what we mean by using flattery as a deceit, because then you're not actually praising them, right? You're expecting them to give you something, and you're just using pretty words as a way to manipulate them into giving you something you want. So if you're working on a team, or not even a team, if you have family members or you have friends and they do something well, you can praise them and compliment them. We should rejoice in people that are engaging in virtuous activity and in beneficial activity. So rejoicing and praise from the side of the giver is very beneficial, right? If you're doing it with the actual intent to rejoice in the virtue that they created and to support them on their path and to encourage them. But if you're doing it because you want something in exchange for your praise, that's when it becomes what we'd call flattery, and it becomes non-beneficial. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah.
Venerable, I have a question. So isn't there a bit of a conflict here, as in butchers and fishermen are, of course, engaging in wrong livelihood, but the community, many Buddhist communities do eat meat.
Yeah.
And so obviously they are just fulfilling a need within the community, and so it's like if there was no need, they would not be butchers and fishermen, right?
Yeah,
but
it's a big question. I can tell you from my side. So the question is about basically participating in an economy of violence that comes from consuming meat and animal products. From my side, as someone who was vegan before I found Buddhism, I have an influence in that direction, where I believe, and you can see Shapkar is a Tibetan scholar who also talks about this in similar language, that there is an economy of violence, that if there weren't people consuming meat, then animals wouldn't be killed, right? And so therefore, even by consuming meat, even if it wasn't directly killed for our benefit, like this wasn't raised and killed just for me, which isn't the case these days in contemporary society as much as it was back in the day, right? Like you'd buy a living goat and then they'd kill it for you. It's not like that now. You go to the supermarket and there's just meat on the shelf, right? So even though this specific animal wasn't raised and murdered for my benefit alone, I'm still participating in a larger ecosystem that is part of the reason this being was killed. So from my side, I think that is a non-beneficial way to act if you don't have to. I don't think there's virtue in it. But the livelihood itself is still, so we're not creating wrong livelihood. If you consume meat, that's not wrong livelihood, right? You may be participating in a greater ecosystem of violence or negativity, and different teachers will think about that differently. Not everyone has the same view. So my view is kind of an extreme view that I have basis for in the teachings, but not everyone accepts it, okay? But that itself, whether you agree with that or not, that there is this ecosystem of violence, it doesn't change the fact that the livelihood itself is still a wrong livelihood. Even if you're fulfilling a need in the society, quote unquote, a need, it's still creating negativity for you. So those two things don't have to be contradictory. It just shows that sometimes one small action, there's enough like non-virtue to go around, that, you know, it's not just for one person. So as an individual, you should strive, if you're able to, not participate in any ecosystems of violence if you are able to avoid them, and if you're not able to avoid them, to be the one actually engaging in the violent actions is a little heavier. So you shouldn't do it as your profession.
Yeah, maybe a bit just for the sake of argument. If I'm a butcher, I can say, well, actually, I'm serving my community. I'm taking all this negative whatever, stuff on myself in order to be of benefit to people.
That's true. I mean, if that's true, like if you were able to have that attitude, then you at least have some beneficial attitude, but you're still killing animals every day over and over and over again. So maybe it's not as bad, but you're still killing animals over and over and over again. So if you don't have any choice, I mean, that the reality and what Buddhism is saying is you always have a choice, right? Like, what is a situation where if you aren't a butcher, then you would not be able to survive? Then maybe you should find a way to survive that isn't being a butcher. Like, that's how heavy some of these teachings are. And if there were no butchers, then everyone would learn to live off of meat that wasn't raised for the sake of being murdered, And I mean, in Tibet, I don't know now. Nowadays, it's much different. Things have progressed in Tibet, but historically in Tibet, a lot of meat that was consumed would be meat that had died naturally. That the meat wasn't raised for the purpose of being slaughtered for food, just because the conditions were such that they didn't have the ability to raise that many animals just for that sake. Now things have changed, I think, a little bit as there's been more technological progress, But Buddhism is saying that's true. Like, you can have a good intention, but like there are some actions that are always non-virtuous, and taking life is always non-virtuous, And so as an individual practitioner, you have to find that balance, what you're going to do.
But I think the intention is more important. So the person, if the person gets a meat killed by the butcher, that person also creates negative karma, right?
I think
Not
so.
just a
Not everyone
butcher.
agrees, but I think so.
Because
so.
there's some Lamnan story also like that.
Yeah, not everyone agrees.
Not everyone agrees to
That if you eat meat, then you have some sort of participation in the death of this animal, and you have some negative karma. Not all Buddhist traditions agree. Never mind, I mean, outside of the Tibetan tradition, if you look at, like, I went to Sri Lanka, which is a Theravada country, and every single dish you eat had meat in it. Everyone, all the vegetable dishes had meat, everything had meat. There was nothing that was not meat-free, because in their tradition, they don't think of the consumption of meat as having any negativity. It's only the killing, right? And even then they understand karma, that it's, in any case, that's like their cultural tradition. Then in Tibetans, you'll see some Tibetans who argue that, like, you eating meat, like, you didn't kill the animal, therefore, and it wasn't killed for you, you didn't request it to be killed, it just happened to be killed and you're consuming it, that you don't have any negative karma. Now, that's not my position, and I have a lot of textual resources and other scholars that, like, I base my opinion on, but I'm sure they have their positions as well, you know? So you have to see what works for you. But in general, even if you don't believe, so I agree with you, Shanti, that, like, consuming meat, I think, for most of us, for ordinary beings, maybe if you are an Arya being who actually have a realized nature of reality, or you're a bodhisattva who actually has real bodhicitta and not just our little baby version of it, then maybe you can consume meat in a way that is actually pure and has, like, a mind of compassion for the sentient being that was murdered and all these things, right? Like, maybe that's possible. And you look at someone like His Holiness Dalai Lama, and he eats meat, but he does his best to only eat meat every other day. So he says that I'm vegetarian half the year because he had tried to not eat meat and he got sick in the 70s. Whether or not that's because people were not giving him proper diet in exchange of meat, who knows? Regardless. So, and he sets an example, right? Because I think so many people have this cultural attachment to meat eating, that to just tell everyone you have to be vegetarian would be very hard. And it would cause people to say, like, well, I'm not going to do this Dharma thing, right? So you have to meet people where they are and always push people to be a little better than they were. So if you have this strong cultural or strong just imprint for consuming meat, and it's really hard to give up, then just try to give it up a little bit, right? And slowly, because you want to always be better than you were the day before. Like, that's the part of the Dharma, right? So if you don't have any choice but to live a livelihood that requires some sort of negative action, at least try to have as strong of a good motivation as you can and as expansive a motivation as you can. But usually, for most of us, and again, I don't have a profession, so it's hard for me to sit up here and tell you this, but for most professions, you could find a way to do that doesn't involve causing harm, right? So that is the goal. But so those three, because I realize our time is kind of short. Those three, right speech, right action, right livelihood, those three are considered the branch of developing trust and respect in others in the Sanskrit tradition. So they're combined in that way. And you can think of how, so first, right view, direct understanding, or the correct understanding of the nature of reality when in meditative equipoise is the branch of affirmation. And then when you're no longer in meditative equipoise, but you are still understanding emptiness and using your understanding of emptiness to guide you and the way you engage in the world and the way you relate to others, then that is the branch of karasana, promoting understanding in others. So others have the understanding of emptiness, understanding of the nature of reality. This third branch, which is focused on your actual deeds of body and speech, as well, body and speech, because livelihood really encompasses both body and speech. So right speech, right action, right livelihood. This is promoting trust and respect in others. So by engaging in the world in such a way that you're not engaging in harmful actions, others will naturally develop respect and trust for you. And as you are a participant or a practitioner of the Dharma, then they'll also develop trust and respect in Dharma as well. Right? So that's why it's called the branch of promoting respect and trust in others. And then the last three are right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, right? So these are the branch of the antidotes to the obstructions, or the antidotes to the obstacles, you could say. So those are the four branches in the Tibetan, in the Sanskrit tradition: the branch of affirmation, the branch of promoting understanding in others, the branch of promoting or developing trust and respect, and then the branch of overcoming obstacles, or the branch of the antidotes to the obstacles. So effort it does just mean perseverance, right? But it is more perseverance in line with the paramita, so a joyful perseverance, right? A mind that is joy, takes joy in virtuous activity. And when you have to experience suffering or difficulty for the purpose of Dharma, is not overwhelmed by them, but actually finds joy in that, right? So it's a type of joyful perseverance. It's not just mere like putting up with something, right? And then it's not just like this grunt effort for the purpose of getting through something with a bad mind. The other thing we talk about when we talk about right effort is what are called the yandak pongwashi. How do you say? The 4 authentic abandonments. I think they're translated as. So the yandak pongwashi is for that virtue that you have accumulated. For the virtue you haven't accumulated, you engage in effort to accumulate it. For that virtue you have accumulated, you engage in effort to increase it. And for the non-virtue that you have acted upon, you exert effort to stop acting on it. And non-virtues that you haven't done yet, you exert effort not to do them. All right?
Could you kindly repeat?
Yeah, I'll repeat those. So if you look at them as like 2 intersecting, like a Punnett square of 2 and 2. So they're called the 4 abandonments. And they are, first, 2 of them are related to virtue, and 2 are related to non-virtue. Okay, and so they're related. Then both of those, there's one that you have done and one you haven't done, right? So for virtue, the virtue you haven't accumulated, you exert effort to accumulate it, and the virtue you have accumulated, you exert effort to maintain it or increase it. And then non-virtue, the non-virtue you haven't accumulated, you make effort to keep not accumulating it, and the non-virtue you have accumulated, you make effort to decrease it or eradicate it. Right. So you think of it in that way. There's 4 of them, but it's 2 related to virtue, 2 related to non-virtue. And then of those 2, each one relates to what you've already accumulated and what you haven't accumulated. And then once you realize that, then it makes sense, like what you want to increase and what you want to decrease. So forth.
They're like the prayer we say the Buddhist.
Yeah. May that bodhicitta that is not arisen, arise and grow, and that which has increased more and more. Right. But then you also apply that same rationale to non-virtuous. So that's also a part of right effort. Right? Not just making effort, to engage in the practice in general, but specifically looking at virtuous actions and non-virtuous actions and engaging in effort with regard to those, and not becoming complacent when you've engaged in non-virtue to say, well, I've already done it. But no, you exert effort to decrease that non-virtue. And in the same way, when you've engaged in virtuous actions, you don't just say, well, that's done. You want to increase it more and more. And part of that is rejoicing, right? Mind of rejoicing is also part of this right effort, is a mind of rejoicing. And then we have mindfulness and concentration. So mindfulness leads to concentration, which is a little bit, they're separate. They're separate parts of the path, but mindfulness itself leads to concentration. And inherent in mindfulness, implicitly taught, is introspection, which is also called vigilance sometimes, right? So mindfulness and vigilance go together. And so what mindfulness is the ability to focus on an object and not be distracted from whatever object you're focused on. And introspection or vigilance is the mind that is trying to watch your own mind to see when you are distracted, right? So introspection is like a spy that's always watching. And mindfulness is like the courier that goes and tells the boss that you've been misbehaving. Okay, that is like a contemporary example. The example you get in the tradition is of when you're trying to tame a wild elephant, right? If the wild elephant is your mind, then the rope that is tied to the stake itself is whatever object you're trying to meditate on. The rope that is tied to that stake is your mindfulness, and then the goad, that like sharp hook that you poke the elephant with, is your introspection. So one of them is trying to be aware when you get out of line, and all it's doing is being aware of it, right? Introspection isn't doing anything besides being aware. It's looking at your own mind and seeing when you're distracted. And then once you recognize you're distracted, your mindfulness will bring your attention back to whatever object you're trying to focus on, right? So really, right mindfulness means right mindfulness and right introspection both, Drempa and Station. And those work together to develop concentration, right? So they work together. If we study shamatha practice, right, and mindfulness meditation and single pointed concentration. So mindfulness and introspection are integral parts to actually developing shamatha, right, single pointed concentration. So then the next one is right concentration. That is, right now we practice concentration to the best of our ability, that we are able to meditate and allow our mind to focus on whatever object we want it to. But as we develop our mindfulness and introspection, then our concentration increases, right? And the reason these are called the branch of the antidote to the obstacles, right, is because it is through our meditation practice that we are able, and through our concentration, that we're actually able to focus on wisdom and understanding emptiness, right? So we talk about understanding emptiness and the meditation on emptiness as being the obstacle, right, the antidote to our delusions I mentioned earlier. But if you don't have concentration, you can't actually develop any understanding of emptiness, right? And if you don't have concentration, you can't see how you're engaging in harmful actions in the world. You need to have some level of awareness of that. And so it works in that regard, that you need. So the meditation itself is the branch of the four divisions. It's the branch of the antidote to the obstacles, because it is through meditation and concentration, and then the effort that goes into that, that allows you to recognize when you're engaging in harmful behavior, when you're self-grasping or your self-cherishing mind are taking control, and then allows you to develop and supplement that with an antidote, whether it be an immediate antidote, like meditating on love or patience, and to overcome an experience of anger, or meditating on emptiness to overcome all of our delusions, right? So we need that concentration. So those are the eightfold path of the Arya being, right? Right view and right thought. Now, I say that these 8 can be condensed into the 3 higher trainings. So I'll do that for you very briefly, right? So the 3 higher trainings are the higher trainings of what?
Ethics.
Ethics and?
Renunciation.
Nope. That's the 3
ethics,
principles.
concentration, wisdom.
Right. So the higher trainings of wisdom, of ethics or morality, and of concentration. And they're called the 3 higher trainings because they are combined with refuge. So the 3 trainings, training in wisdom, morality, and concentration, any being can do, right? But when they're combined with a mind of refuge in the 3 jewels, they become the higher trainings. That's where the word higher comes in this. So when we could talk about, I'll talk for a minute about how those work. But first, the practice of right view and right thought, those are the higher training of wisdom, right? Understanding the nature of reality. Those 2 are combined and included in the higher training of wisdom. And then right speech, right action, and right livelihood are the higher training of morality or ethics. And then the last 3, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are the higher training of concentration. So whenever you study the 3 higher trainings, you're also studying the Eightfold Path at the same time, right? But just looking at it from a different direction. So one way to think of the 3 higher trainings is that I want to make sure I don't miss any of the things. You know, one of the 3 higher trainings are critical for all of our practice. And ultimately, it's the understanding of the nature of reality that is most important. But we need to rely upon the training of morality and the training of concentration to get there. So one of the ways this is explained is that our whole goal, right, is to get rid of all of our obscurations, both of our afflicted obscurations and our cognitive obscurations. And that all comes from developing a direct realization of the nature of reality. But before we can get rid of those really subtle mental afflictions, we can get rid of the physical disruptions as well, right? And so those are easier to overcome. And so for an example, if you get angry at someone, right? Like your mind of anger, once that arises, then the instinct to yell or say bad things or to like strike them, it's much easier to refrain from saying bad things and striking them than it is from having the mind of anger in the first place. That takes more work to overcome, right? So we can refrain from the disturbances of our body and speech in a way that's easier than to refrain from the disturbances of mind. And ideally, our practice will let us refrain from all of them, but those ones are first. So we think often of the practices of concentration and the practices of morality as learning how to refrain from negative actions of body and speech. And then the practice of wisdom is refraining from the subtle actions of mind, right? Now, they all work together. It's not a one-to-one, but that is one way to think about it, right? Especially when you look at morality and ethics, and then you look at concentration, what those are doing for you is helping you learn how to, even when you have these negative minds emerge, not act on them, right? You're able to look at them clearly and see how these are harmful, right? And you condition yourself to not engage in non-virtuous behavior so that you don't have that instinct to engage in non-virtue. So that helps you overcome the disruptions of body and speech and mind to some extent. But then focusing on emptiness is really what helps you overcome the obstacles of mind or the disturbances of mind. So one of the ways this is explained is if you are trying to, view a picture in a dark room or read a text in a dark room and you have a lamp, that lamp needs to have two qualities to allow you to see, right? It needs to have the quality of being bright, right? And it also has to have the quality of being unwavering, of not flickering. And so engaging in the practices of the higher training of morality and the higher training of concentration are providing stability. They're stopping that bright light of wisdom from flickering. Engaging in the practice of the higher training of wisdom is increasing the intensity of that light. So then not only is it not flickering, but it is allowing you to see, right? So you can see that if we want to be able to see the nature of reality, we need that bright lamp of wisdom and the bright lamp of the understanding of emptiness. But that doesn't come just from thinking of wisdom alone. It also needs to be complemented by right morality and right concentration, which prevent that light from moving around and flickering, right? So we can think of it as stability and brightness in one way. They all three contribute to our ability to engage in a meaningful and complete practice. The other way we can think about the three higher trainings is, so much of our practice has to be based in moral discipline and ethics. And so the analogy they give is if you were cutting down a tree, so you picture someone cutting down a tree, the stance, having that strong, balanced stance, that is your morality. That is your ethical discipline. And then the strength that you have, or the axe itself and the strength with which you swing the axe, that is your concentration. That's what's giving power to your practice. And then knowing the exact place on the tree to strike the axe, that's the wisdom. So if your goal is to cut down a tree, you need all three of those. If you don't, the most important, obviously, is knowing where to strike. If you don't know where to strike, then you're not going to get anywhere. But if you don't have a stable foundation and you don't have strength in your swing, then you're not going to get anywhere either, right? And in the same way, if your goal is to be free from suffering for yourself and all sentient beings, you have to have that basis of moral discipline and ethical discipline of body, speech, and mind. You have to have the concentration that allows your mind to stay focused and allows you to look at yourself and at others and your actions in the world and allows you to develop an understanding of the subtle truth of reality. And then you actually have to have that mind that understands the nature of reality, that it serves as the antidote to the coarse and subtle delusions. So you need ethics and concentration and wisdom. In the same way that someone cutting down a tree needs to have a solid, a strong stance, have strength, and then know where to strike the tree. So we can think of the three in that way as well. Now, earlier I had said, sorry, I'm looking at the time and trying to get everything I want to talk about fit into this time. So that is how the Eightfold Path can be condensed into the three higher trainings. Earlier I said, the Buddha says when you see dependent origination, then you see the Dharma. And when you see the Dharma, then you see Buddha. And by Buddha, we mean you see the Buddha mind. You see the full realization of the capacity of all sentient beings to become perfectly enlightened. And that can go in the reverse order too. When you see a Buddha, then what you're seeing is the Dharma. When you understand the Dharma, what you're really understanding is dependent origination. Dependent origination and understanding how dependent origination work is incredibly important, right? So Kampa is one of the ones who has an uncommon way of explaining and understanding that dependent origination is itself emptiness. And so by understanding dependent origination, you understand emptiness. Not all the teachings have that position, but that is the uncommon position of the Prasangika school as taught by Tsongkhapa, right? But when you're trying to understand dependent origination, Asanga gives three conditions that help us understand it. So the first is what is called the unwavering condition. And so Asanga said, because of this, there is that. Or actually, because of that, there is this. That's what he said. That's called the unwavering condition, and it's teaching the truth of cause and effect. Because of that, there is this. That's the unwavering condition. The second condition is called the impermanent condition. Because that is produced, this is produced. And that's showing that not only is there a cause and effect, but that cause and effect are impermanent. They don't permanently exist. They themselves are impermanent. And then, so there is the unwavering condition. Because of that, there's this. Because that exists, this exists. There's the impermanent condition. Because that is produced, this is produced. So not only that it exists, but it's produced. Then the third one is what is called sometimes called the condition of the concomitant condition, or the condition of potentiality. And this is really the link, showing the links of all the 12 links of dependent origination. So because there is ignorance, then you have karma. Because you have karma, you have consciousness. Because you have consciousness, you have name and form. Because you have name and form, you have the 6 sense faculties. Because you have the sense faculties, you have contact. Because of contact, you have feeling. Because of feeling, you have grasping. Because of grasping, you have, how do you say in English? Clinging, or stronger grasping. Craving. Because of grasping, you have craving. Because of craving, you have becoming. Because of becoming, you have birth and rebirth. And because of that, you have old age and death, right? The 12 links of dependent origination. Those all build off of one another, right? So that's called the conditionality of being concomitant, right? And that same way, when the understanding the 12 links, I know there's teaching on the 12 links in weeks past. When you are able to cut out ignorance, then you stop karma. And then once karma stops, consciousness stops. And once the link of consciousness stops, name and form stops, and so forth, right? They're like domino effect in both directions. But so that understanding how those are linked is the third condition, what's called the condition of concomitance. And what that really means is that the cause and the result have to be concomitant, right? When you plant an apple seed, you get an apple tree, not an orange tree, and so forth. So the takeaway from these three conditions is that to understand dependent origination is, if something exists, it has a cause. If something has a cause, that cause has to be impermanent, and that cause has to be concomitant with, or in the same nature of, the result, right? Or aligned with the result, concordant with the result. And the reason I bring that up is because we recognize the Eight Noble Path as the cause that is concordant with Buddhahood, right? The Eightfold Path, that we've been discussing today, is the cause that is concordant with achieving Buddhahood.
Is it also called uncommon condition?
The what?
If you have the 3 causes of an I consciousness, which one of the 3 would be the concomitant condition?
It's an I consciousness. So if you have an I consciousness that perceives a pod, then the 3 causes of that would be the external cause, which is the pod itself, the internal cause, which is the I sense organ, and then the previously existing cause, or the uncommon, how do you say, Gyalten?
Immediately.
There's 4 causes. There's the immediately preceding moment, and then there's the Gyalten, which is like the causal.
Uncommon empowering condition.
So the concomitant one, I don't know if you apply it to the sense organs in this way, but I would say it would have to be the uncommon. It would be the I sense organ, right? Because that is what is allowing the I sense consciousness to exist in such a way that it perceives form, right? And so in the same way, your I sense consciousness can't perceive color. Can't perceive odor, because the perception of odor is discordant with the ability of the I sense consciousness. I don't know if that lines up 100% to what we're talking to, but that would be my interpretation of it when you apply it to that thing. Of course, an omniscient mind can perceive anything. All omniscient minds perceive all phenomena simultaneously. So the Buddha's I sense consciousness can smell form. Can smell the odors, because it's Buddha. It's omniscient. We get to enjoy that as well eventually. We're just not there yet.
Namaji, when they say that the Buddha is omniscient, does it mean that he knew everything every aspect of reality? For example, would he know that we are sitting here today? I mean,
yeah. So there are two ways of understanding omniscience. There's the way that's taught in the Theravada tradition and the way that's taught in the Mahayana tradition. So in the Theravada tradition, and all of the Hinayana schools, not just the Theravada school, but all of the Hinayana schools that don't exist anymore either, their understanding of the all-knowing mind is that any being with an all-knowing mind can understand anything they want when they point their mind toward it. That they don't know it all the time, but any object they point their mind to, then they automatically can understand it. The Mahayana understanding of an omniscient mind is that Buddha knows all phenomena simultaneously at all times. So an omniscient mind does know that we are all here today.
So would it mean that the historical Shakyamuni Buddha, 2,500 years ago, knew that in 2025, 27th of July, we'd be sitting here and...
Yeah. Well, I mean,
What do you do with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that knowledge isn't particularly useful.
No, but would you know it? I mean, is that the
Yeah.
assumption?
Yeah. And that's part of how Buddhists can make prophecies, right? That's how part of Buddhists say, like, this is what is going to happen in the future. And that's part of how Buddhists know what the most appropriate practice is for certain people. And that's how Buddha knows that if I teach you in this way, it's going to be the most benefit to you because I can see the results of me teaching you in this way, right? But so the way the Mahayana understands omniscience is that they know all phenomena simultaneously at all times.
So he knows that there's going to be AI and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we have to say yes, but knowing it, yeah,
not know.
Yeah.
How do you know?
In our language, we have something called Trikaldarshi, which means they can see all three times. Is that so for also in the Mahayana definition of the Buddhas?
Yeah, we said they can see all three times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Past, present, and future. They know all things. I mean, to be honest, the omniscient mind is like overwhelming to think about, right? And it seems absurd. I agree that seems like an absurd claim. But the importance of understanding it is that the Buddha has the capacity to. Now, the vast majority of knowledge in the world, of worldly knowledge, is not benefit, right? So just because someone has the ability to understand something or does understand it, doesn't mean that's useful information. But an omniscient mind is so all-encompassing that it can understand it. And if there's any benefit to be wrought out of it, they're able to mobilize that benefit, right? But I agree, that is a little bit of almost an absurd thought. Because it also, if you think about it too much, you have these ideas of predetermination and whether or not things happen in only one way and how about branching timelines and so forth. And so it's right to be doubtful or to be skeptical about it, but think of what it means to have the capacity to understand all phenomena simultaneously, right? And how is that related to understanding the nature of reality? And if you have a hard time fully accepting that idea of omniscience, that's okay, but you can see what is implied by it and the benefits, not implied by it, but how that is a natural result of deep understanding of the nature of reality. And if you just kind of use that kind of working definition for your own mind, then that's a useful way to go forward. But we do believe, I mean, there's so much hagiography when we understand the Buddha too, that if it's not useful for your practice, then it's not. But it is, for me, the importance of understanding the omniscient mind is that all of the teachings talk about an all-knowing mind. We did have slightly different definitions in the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition of what an all-knowing mind means. But we all say that the state of complete liberation from Buddhahood, the state of Buddhahood, which allows you to access an all-knowing mind, it's because it's the mind itself that is what frees you from samsara, right? Samsara isn't a physical place. Even though we can say Zambuling, the Jambudvipa is a world, right? It's a physical world, quote unquote. Our freedom from samsara isn't a physical freedom, right? It's a mental freedom. And it's through the power of our mind that we are free from suffering, right? It's through the power of understanding the nature of reality that we're able to be free from suffering. So it's all due to the power of our mind. And so understanding that the logical outcome of that powerful mind is omniscience. That's how it's useful for me, to see that this is something that the human mind, or the mind of all sentient beings, is capable of achieving. That is something that's so outside of my capacity for even understanding right now. That is inspiring, right? Or it can be. That like this is within your capacity as a sentient being, to have a mind that totally blows everything that you think of as normal out of the water. And so for me, I allow it to inspire me. And those little details, then those don't really upset me as much, or I don't linger on them. Though, sometimes when you're looking at your teachers, if you have the mind of your teacher, if you have the understanding that your teacher is a Buddha, and your teacher gives you some advice that is in line with the Dharma, but maybe particularly hard or unpleasant advice, something you don't want to do, then it's also helpful to think that they know more than I do, right? Whether they have an omniscient mind or just a mind that's more highly realized than me, it's useful to then look at those teachings that are maybe difficult to apply and say, okay, I accept that they have an understanding of the nature of reality that is more in-depth and more profound than my own. They've achieved siddhis, we'd say. Like one of the early siddhis you achieve, one of the early, engaging in concentration, engaging in the practice of concentration, you can achieve what are called the super consciousnesses. That's one of the translations of them. Or the other translation is, I can't think of the word in English, but one of them is the ability to understand others' minds, right? The ability to understand clairvoyances. That's right. So there's more than one type of clairvoyance. We say there's 6 types of clairvoyance, common clairvoyances, that you can achieve through the power of concentration. Non-Buddhists can actually achieve them as well, but it's easier when you're meditating on emptiness to achieve them. And so the first one you talk about the most is being able to understand others' minds, right? That's the type of clairvoyance that not only Buddhists have, but we can achieve. I mean, I don't know if I can achieve it, but like, you don't have to be a Buddha to achieve that level of clairvoyance. There's other types of clairvoyance as well. There's one clairvoyance, which is the ability to see like infinitely far distances. And there's a type of clairvoyance that allows you to, there are 6 of them. One of them is only in the mind of a Buddha, but the rest of them can be achieved by other people. And there's also the 5 eyes, which are also good. There's 6 clairvoyances and the 5 eyes. The eyes are just basically types of clairvoyance with a slightly different definition. Anyway, the point is, for me, when I study these topics, even the ones that seem fantastical, like they belong in some of the fiction books that I read, they inspire me, and I can allow them to be inspirational. And as part of my practice, even those things that at first blush, I don't take them, I have a hard time accepting them as being factually possible. I don't say this is ridiculous, therefore I don't accept it. I say, okay, this isn't within my realm of understanding right now. And for right now, accepting this as being true fact is causing like an obstacle to the rest of my practice. So I'm going to take this as interpretive right now. I'm going to accept that it exists, that it was teaching of the Buddha, that it's valid, and that by accepting it as an interpretive teaching, it benefits me in these ways. And then I'm just going to put it on the side. And then I can come back to it later and see if my opinion of it has changed. But don't let it be an obstacle for your teaching, right? And don't let it be an opportunity to deny the teachings of the Buddha, but just say, okay, this is an interpretive teaching that is useful for me in these ways. And then I don't let it be an obstacle for me, So some of the more fantastical teachings, that is a useful way to approach them. I mean, for Westerners, like most Westerners have to approach the teachings of rebirth that way, and the teachings of karma. When you first understand karma, and in order to understand karma, you have to accept rebirth. Otherwise, all karma only would exist in one lifetime. And if all karma only existed in one lifetime, there'd be no way to understand why there are really awful people that get everything they want, and why like young children die when they're babies. Like there's no logic to it. If you only accept that karma exists only in one lifetime, it would just be pure chaos and randomness, right? And that's like a hard thing for Westerners to accept. It's a little easier for Indians because they already have a cultural tradition of accepting rebirth, right? So it's not as hard. But for Westerners, at first, there's like a big obstacle there. And so for me, especially, even the idea of the 6 realms of rebirth and everything, when I first started studying, I said, okay, I understand these are taught. I understand the benefit of them. I have a hard time with them. So I'm not going to deny them, but they're not going to be central to my practice right now. I'm going to focus on these other parts that I can notice immediate benefit to my mind. And then as I deepen my meditation practice and I deepen my understanding, then those things made more sense and they became natural for me, right? So the important thing is not denying them. But then if there are obstacles, you can put them to the side. It's okay. I'm sorry, was there a question? Yeah.
I have a question about Asanga's 3 condition. You said the 3rd condition was the same nature as the result. So I'm not understanding how karma is the same nature as ignorance.
Yeah, sorry. So nature is a specific word. Maybe that's not the right one. So karma is the same nature of ignorance. What I mean by that is, in this regard, so it's not all karma. It's specifically when you look at the 12 links of dependent integration, the 12 links of dependent origination. The second link that I qualified as karma, it's really the link of duchikipumpo, of formation. And it's really referencing contaminated throwing karma. So it's a specific type of karma. It's not all karma, first off. I said karma in brief, right? But it really is contaminated karma because you have karma that's free of contamination as well. And so we say that contaminated karma is the direct result of ignorance, because here ignorance means self-grasping or grasping at true existence, the true existence of both the self and true existence of phenomena. And we believe that grasping at true existence, all of our actions of body, speech, and mind are concurrent with a mind that grasps at true existence. And so it's that mind of grasping at true existence that creates the karma that propels us into further rebirths, that keeps us locked in samsara, right? It's because it's the karma, specifically, this is the propelling contaminated karma that is causing us to be reborn in samsara in one realm or another, right? That's the karma that we talked about in the 12 links. And that has as one of its substantial causes grasping onto true existence. So that's how they're related. So grasping onto true existence, whether it is explicit or implicit, can't have a result that is beneficial, right? Grasping at true existence can't be virtuous. It can be neutral and it can be non-virtuous, but it can't be virtuous. So it's always going to have a result that is in line with that in that way. If you go to a teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination or dependent arising, I try to say dependent arising and dependent origination at the same time, and it gets a little mashed up. There are two different words in Tibetan, but we use them interchangeably in Tibetan and also in English. Tenjung is dependent arising, and Tendrel is dependent origination. But sorry, my tongue trips on them. When you study those, then there'll be more detail into how the first link of Marikpe Tendrel, so the dependent origination of the link of ignorance, and how that works. So it's noon now. I wanted to do a meditation on the 3 higher trainings. And I also wanted to talk about how these apply to the 3 principal aspects of the path. We don't really have time for both of those. We don't really have time for either of those if we have any more questions. But so very briefly, so I think we're not going to do a meditation today. That's okay. We're going to end at 12:15 because I didn't take a break. So we'll end at 12:15. Briefly, I just wanted to touch on the 3 principal aspects of the path. Now, we've done a whole series of classes on these, so I'm not going to teach them in their entirety here, but it's useful since we often look at those as the way of understanding the complete encapsulation of our practice. We look at the 3 principal aspects of the path, and we often teach those in place of teaching the Eightfold Path, so it's just useful to think of them, right? And that's uncommon to the Mahayana. So the 3 higher trainings and the grouping of the Eightfold Path into the 3 higher trainings is done equally in the Pali tradition and in the Mahayana tradition, right? That's the same. We have slightly different definitions and things like that, but that the first 2, right view and right thought, are the higher concentration of wisdom, and then right speech, right action, and right livelihood are the higher concentration of morality, and then right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are included in the higher training of concentration. All Buddhist traditions agree on that. The 3 principal aspects of the path are uncommon to the Mahayana tradition, and that is saying that all the teachings of the Buddha and all the things we need to engage in the path that will bring us to Buddhahood are encompassed within the practices of renunciation and bodhicitta and wisdom, or understanding emptiness, right? And so we often talk about all of the practices of the path as coming from those 3. And it's more often we have teachings that use those 3 as the basis instead of the 8. And there are different ways that you can break up the 8 into those 3. And it just depends on the purpose of your teaching, like what you want to emphasize. So one of the common ways would just be say that the act of renunciation. So renunciation is the wish to be free from suffering, right? I think of renunciation as self-compassion. Today in the West, you often have this teaching, especially in Western psychology, that before you can have compassion for others, you have to have compassion for yourself. This idea of self-compassion is really important. And I agree, it's important. But what I think is really meant, at least in the Buddhist sense, by self-compassion is renunciation. Because we say compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, right? That's the definition of compassion. So if I wish for myself to be free from suffering, that means I want to be free from samsara. That means I need renunciation. So renunciation is self-compassion, at least in my understanding of the teachings of the Buddha and of Buddhist psychology. So renunciation is this wish to be free from suffering. And so all of the practices in the Lamrim that are associated with the middle scope are based in renunciation, right? So that's why in the middle scope, you understand first the sufferings of the upper realms, and right, because the small scope only wants to be reborn with a positive rebirth, right? That's the goal of a small scope being. So all of the practices and topics that we share in common with the small scope being, if we only practice those in isolation, they would lead to at least a positive rebirth, such as meditating on death and impermanence, and meditating on the law, and meditating on perfect human rebirth, and developing a mind of refuge, right? And then when you want to actually, and karma, sometimes karma straddles between small scope and medium scope, depending on the teacher. But when your goal is no longer just to have positive rebirth, but to be free from samsara entirely for yourself, that is when you become a middle scope practice. And that is based in renunciation, right? Not wishing just to be free from the 3 lower realms, but also wishing to be free from all samsara. So then you study the sufferings of the 3 upper realms, and you study all the different sufferings of samsara, like we talked about earlier today. And then you study law of cause and effect and the 12 links of dependent origination. Those are the common topics that you're taught there, right? So those are all based in renunciation, having the wish to be free from samsara and understanding how our actions keep us trapped in samsara. So for me, I look at the right the right speech, the right action, and the right livelihood. So those 3 that are contained in the practice of morality, I think those are related to renunciation. Or at least that's one common way of teaching them. This isn't the exhaustive way. You can teach these things, you can manipulate them around, because again, all it is conceptual frameworks, right? The teaching itself is the same. It's the conceptual framework to understand those teachings. So one way to think about it is those 3 that we consider the higher training morality, right? The 3 of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Those are all taught when you teach renunciation. When you're teaching bodhicitta, so this is the uncommon Mahayana perspective, right? That all of our actions need to be motivated by the desire to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. That great compassion and the wish to always be of service to others is the primary motivating factor for all of our activity. It makes all of our activity beneficial, right? Bodhicitta in that way. That, I think, encompasses the final 3, 6, 7, and 8. So right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And the reason for that is when you study the practice of bodhisattva, you study the 6 perfections, and those 3 are explicitly taught in the study of the 6 perfections, right? With the perfection of perseverance, the perfection of concentration. You have those 3 that are taught. And then the first 2, right view and right thought, the right intention, I think of as being encompassed within wisdom, right? Or understanding emptiness. So that would be how I see those 8 being then subdivided into the teachings of the 3 trainings, 3 principal aspects of the path. But again, other teachers might divide them differently if that's more useful for the teaching they're given, because this is all just conceptual frameworks to understand all the different pieces, you know? I think a couple weeks ago, you had asked, well, like, why don't we teach the 8-fold path that often, which is what inspired me to talk about it today. But the reason we don't is because we teach all the topics of the 8-fold path just in a different format, right? There's no denying the 8-fold path. It's just that for some reason in the Mahayana tradition, especially because the 8-fold path doesn't encompass bodhicitta, we can think of bodhicitta as being somewhere in right thought, right? Because often how right thought is often considered renunciation in the Pali tradition. We can, if we want, teach bodhicitta as part of right thought, but it isn't there in the original teachings as that. Like, we are free to add it in there. It would be a logical place for it to be taught. But if you look at the scriptures, you don't see it included there quite often. At least not that I know of. Maybe it is, but I haven't seen it. So because of that, we refocus those 8 steps to include bodhicitta as like a primary factor. And that is one of the reasons that the 8-fold path isn't just taught on its own. It's taught as aspects through the 3 principal aspects of the path, or like in our tradition, through the long rim, the sages of the long rim. All the same topics are taught, but reordered in a way that takes bodhicitta into account.
In our conventional Indian understanding of renunciation, it's basically when you ask someone, when we speak about renunciation, what we think is you leave your home and just become a wanderer and you just beg for your livelihood, and that's renunciation. So what exactly is meant when you talk about renunciation?
So renunciation, so that is confusing external renunciation for actual renunciation, right? So giving up things is not renunciation. It's giving up the mind that's attached to those things, right? So if you're able to develop a mind that isn't attached to your home, to pleasure, to all these things, then that's developing a mind of renunciation. It doesn't matter if you have them or not, right? So obviously for most of us, we say, like, I renounce this life. You know, when we study renunciation, there's the teaching, what is renunciation? Or what does it mean to practice Dharma? Is to renounce this life. But what does that mean? Is not to give up all the nice things you have, especially for lay people, but to give up the mind that grasps onto them as being more important than anything else in the world, and the mind that doesn't understand how they exist in relationship to you. So true renunciation is an inner practice. Now, it's true that the outer renunciation can make that easier sometimes, right? Like if you're not constantly surrounded by nice things, it's easier to develop a lack of affectation for them. But that's not 100% true. Like that's not the real answer. And for, someone like me who is used to growing up in America, living in India, where I have to renounce certain things that I'm used to. But then you go back and you think, oh, okay, I must have made some progress, right? I've done something. Then you go back to America and you're like, oh, nope. I didn't make progress. I just happened to forget these things, right? Or maybe I made a little bit of progress, a little bit of baby steps. But it's easy to think you made progress just when you've eliminated the circumstances. But then you have to go back into those circumstances and see, have you really made any internal progress? At the same time, though, and when we teach trying to develop mindfulness and trying to develop concentration or shine, shamatha, right, single point of concentration, the first instruction is to abandon your homeland. Find an isolated place, right? Abandon your homeland, because that your homeland is where all of the people exist that you have these pre-existing relationships of attachment and anger with, right? So it's going to be hard to actually develop concentration when you have all these pre-existing relationships. But the whole point is then once you develop concentration, you should be able to go back there and still have concentration and no longer be burdened by them. So we recognize that sometimes we need to navigate our external circumstances to give ourselves the best conditions possible to then work on our mind. But if we only do the first step and create those beneficial conditions, but then don't do the next step of actually working on our mind, then it's no point. So if I give up everything I own and I go wander the countryside, but I don't actually give up my attachment to all those things that I gave up, who cares? It doesn't help at all, right? So, yeah.
Remember the other traditions don't have compassion in them? Or they don't have so much emphasis on compassion?
The Buddhist traditions.
Mm-hmm.
So all Buddhist traditions have compassion. And there are even, and I can't speak for contemporary Theravada practitioners, but in Hinayana teachings, there are discussions of bodhisattvas, and there are discussions even of bodhicitta, right? That idea of those exist within the philosophy of those teachings, but they don't emphasize that compassion and bodhicitta has to be the primary motivation, right? So they emphasize that you are working to free yourself from samsara, and so that is the primary motivation, is that you have the ability to be free from all suffering for yourself, right, and to become an arhat. And so within the activity of an arhat is benefiting others, whether that be through giving teachings or making offerings or helping the poor or whatever it is. Compassion is an integral part of the practice of someone who is on that path, but it isn't the motivating factor. It's just an integral part of their path, but it doesn't motivate them in the way that compassion and bodhicitta motivate someone on the Mahayana path, right? And so that's the reason we use the terms in the philosophical tradition of using the terms Mahayana and Hinayana, which people don't like the term Hinayana because they think it's derogatory. But what it means, and we have a very clear definition of it, is that Hinayana meaning the lesser vehicle, Mahayana meaning greater vehicle, Hina meaning lesser. In Tibetan, we say Menpa, lower. It's because the goal of the Hinayana vehicle is to achieve enlightenment or to achieve liberation for one person, for that one person practicing. Whereas the goal of the Mahayana vehicle is to achieve Buddhahood for all sentient beings. So the goal itself is more expansive. And it's for that reason that we use the terms Mahayana and Hinayana, right? And so for me personally, I always come against this difficulty when you're studying the philosophical texts. The contemporary practitioners of Hinayana are all Theravada. So calling them Theravada is appropriate because they want to be called that and because they all are part of the Theravada philosophical system or school. But historically, there were many other Hinayana schools. They just don't exist anymore. So when I'm talking about teachings from the point of view of what has happened in the past, I'm not only referencing the Theravada practitioners, I'm referencing a whole host of different practitioners. And so the most appropriate way to describe all of that, we say there's traditionally at least 18 Hinayana schools that are highly recognized, that have philosophical distinctions between them. Theravada is only one of those 18. And there are other schools that say there's actually 400 Hinayana schools. So you can, depending on how you subdivide them. But they're commonly accepted 18 different Hinayana schools. But the others just didn't have enough practitioners. They've fallen out of favor. And so the only one that exists now is Theravada. So in my language, if I use the term Hinayana, it's because I'm trying to reference more than just contemporary everyday practitioners. When I want to reference anyone who's currently practicing in the Theravada school, I'll try to say Theravada. But if I'm trying to reference a historical movement or a philosophical system that's bigger than that, I'll often use the term Hinayana, though that is a contested term these days. So I'm trying to be mindful of that. But so that when I say that all the Hinayana schools, that goes back to all the schools following the time of the Buddha, all have compassion as an integral practice, but just not always a motivating practice. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Venerable. So you are a person from a Western country in this lifetime, but maybe you were a person from an Eastern part of the globe in some previous lifetime. So how come? And I would like, I tend to think maybe you were. That is why you like the Buddhist path and taking. Then how come the idea of karma is hard to accept?
So
And
I
the
mean,
corollary to that
yes.
is like my own, like I don't think I've ever been a very strong Hindu, though Hinduism does speak about rebirth. I have been in the cultural setup, but in terms of
religious
prayer and religious spirit, I've probably not had any. And yet someone like me with just some cultural noise in the background finds it, I mean, it's not dissonant for me.
I mean, I think that, so I would, again, understanding the actual karma of why I was reborn in the West this time versus whatever, the likelihood of me being in some sort of Eastern or Tibetan tradition in past lives is high, since I'm so drawn to it in this life, right? My teacher that I lived with joked that I couldn't have been a Tibetan in past life. I had to be an Indian because I like spicy food so much. That it had to be an Indian, not a Tibetan. But regardless, we don't know that, right? Because we're not Buddhists. We don't have the ability to actually understand the subtle workings of karma. But I tend to agree that most likely I had some connection to Dharma in past lives, probably in a Buddhist country, most likely. Then for whatever reason, the karma that ripened was karma that had me be reborn in the West, right? We talked about karma. There's different types of karma that ripens, right? And one of the results is the environment you're born in. So whatever karma that ripened at that time was karma born in the West. I think, to answer your question though, for someone that doesn't have a strong level of realization, like when you have strong realizations of Dharmic realizations, those continue in future lives, or they're easier to access, which is why you can see some people that, never mind Dharma, when they're teaching any topic, they can just hear the meaning of it once and they understand it right away because they have some imprint of having studied it before, right? So even people in the West that might have really strong imprints of having studied and believed in karma before, they may not have any obstacles, right? Because they just get it right away. But the rest of us are conditioned by our culture, right? So I think just Western culture itself, which is itself based in Abrahamic faiths that don't believe in rebirth, even if I don't believe those faiths, my cultural upbringing is based in those, in the same way that yours is based in an Indian cultural upbringing with Hinduism as like the predominant cultural ideology. So even if you don't have a specific belief in the religion or faith, your cultural instinct, that your cultural formation has that as a belief. And so as a result, one thing or another is easier or more difficult to, you have like a natural belief or a natural block towards it. So my impression would be that even though it's more likely than not, I was a Buddhist, I had access to I studied the Dharma in past lives, probably in a Buddhist country. I didn't have a realization of karma and rebirth that was strong enough that it immediately emerged in this life. And then I had to go through the practice again of coming to it.
I think a lot of things we learn only in this life, like languages, almost no one remembers which language they knew and they passed it.
I mean, I think for most of us that are ordinary beings that don't have really strong imprints one way or the other, the imprints kind of point us in a direction, right? But I mean, for the most part, like it's this life. But you see some people that just learn things really easily, And like, for instance, the monk I live with, I don't live with him right now. He's at his home. But he's a tulku, a reincarnate lama. And he was a translator for Dalai Lama in India, the English language translator or junior translator for a long time. And then I got him hooked up with people at Harvard. So he went to Harvard and got his master's degree after getting his Larampa degree from Sarah. When he came to Sarah, he wasn't recognized as a tulku, as a reincarnate lama. He was just a regular kid, And my teacher noticed that he was just learning really quickly. He went to school like all the other kids. He went to the Sarah J school. And he was learning things really quickly. Anything he studied, he'd understand it right away. And so then my teacher said, oh, there's something special about him. And he's able to get a meeting with His Holiness Dalai Lama. And His Holiness Dalai Lama did a divination and went into meditation and said, oh, he is the reincarnation of the abbot of this monastery. And so, but so that realization came due to His Holiness's doing that divination, but it's because we observed him, or not me, my teacher observed him and just saw he had a natural inclination to learn things really easily, you know? And so that imprint, even though he is an ordinary being, like he's not an Arya being, he's not, you know, an actual Bodhisattva, he's the same as us, but he had enough practice in a past life that it ripened more quickly. It's really funny watching him study for exams, his Larampa exams. The Larampa exams go for 6 years and they take 2 weeks. Like every year, it's a 2-week long exam. And everyone else is like stressing out and like running around all their notebooks and all their textbooks. And he literally would sit on the veranda and like with his sunglasses on, and he'd have a book in front of him and he'd just be like, just like that, like so relaxed. I don't know what his inside was like, but from the outside, he looked like he was cool as a cucumber, you know, and everyone else is like running around and stressed out. And he's like, and he ended up number 2 in like all of the Giluk exams every year. And that's not just for Sarah, it's for Sarah, Gandhan, and Tirpum all combined. He always sort of like number 2 place. And he's like, So, you know, I wish I had those imprints. I don't. I think most of what we do, though, is in this life. And that's why we have to put the effort into this life, using whatever abilities and whatever opportunities we have, right? Everyone has different opportunities, different abilities, different skill sets. Some people are going to be more inclined to one thing or another. But we have to look at what we're inclined to and say, how can I use these predispositions to propel me forward in the Dharma, right? Which is why some people are great scholars. Some people focus on meditation. Some people who focus on service because of their past life imprints might compel them to practice the Dharma in one way or another. So we have to see what way we can use whatever abilities we have, whether worldly abilities, worldly intelligence, or these predispositions to point us towards Buddhahood. Okay, I think we'll end there because I've gone a little late. So let us just conclude with some prayers. These would be on page 36. Right? Yeah, 36. So we recognize that by coming together today, studying the Dharma, we have accumulated some sort of virtue, some merit. And instead of keeping that merit for ourselves, we develop the wish or the aspiration that we can dedicate all that merit to other sentient beings, that all sentient beings are suffering, might be free from all suffering, that all those who are sick might be free of their illness, that all those who have died might quickly take a perfect human rebirth and meet with a Mahayana virtuous friend, that all of the teachers might continue to display long and healthy lives, that all of the great works of all the different Buddhist teachers and lineages might be accomplished without any obstacles, and that we ourselves might quickly and more quickly achieve the state of perfect Buddhahood, because it is from that state that we will be of most benefit to all sentient beings. So we dedicate our merit specifically in those ways. And so we'll recite these 2 dedication verses, as well as the verse for the long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Thank you all very much for spending time with me today. For those of you that are available tomorrow on the actual holiday, there is a program happening here at the center at 5 o'clock. And I will be trying to attend. I don't know if I will be. I'm going to try to. I'm going to be in Bangalore because I was asked to teach somewhere else by the education department at Sarah, asked me to help out with one of the universities that we have a memorandum with. But if I can make it here, I will. So even if I can't, there'll be, a Shakyamuni Buddha Puja and a recitation of the Golden Light Sutra. And that's going to be online as well. So I encourage you all to celebrate the holiday in any way you can, whether with us or on your own.
Venerable, I just want to take this opportunity to formally, we've been talking to venerable teachers about leading a retreat for all of us. And just wanted to officially request you, if you don't mind, our students have written a letter. Can I read it out loud?
Sure.
Dear precious venerable teachers, Venerable Thupten Kalden, Venerable Gyalten Lekden, and Venerable Tenzin Gache, we CKSL volunteers and humble disciples of the lineage thank you 1,000 times from our hearts for your limitless generosity in guiding our spiritual development for the benefit of all sentient beings and for your unending patience with our shortcomings. We sincerely wish to continue studying and developing along the gradual path so we all can attain the perfect state of a Buddha and bring all precious mother sentient beings to that state without any delay. To this noble end, we wish to follow the example of our brave and determined bodhisattvas who walked the path before us and to follow and fulfill the advice and wishes of our most precious lineage lamas that we study the Lamrim outlines and Lamrim and attain its realizations. To further sustain and hasten our efforts, would you please, in your incredible kindness, extend your guidance and sustenance of our practice and bestow the blessings of the lineage on us through a Lamrim retreat this coming September at Serajay campus. May this sincere request please all the gurus and the Buddhas of the 3 times and the 10 directions and the entire field of merit. May we always be worthy and suitable vessel to receive your guidance. May you, dear venerables, and all the precious teachers live long lives and have precious conditions for benefiting countless sentient beings, and may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May we always be able to benefit from your guidance. With much gratitude, I'm giving you the official letter.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for teaching us the life. I really hope that you are able to join us tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the retreat that we are organizing is between 18th September to 21st at Serajay. So we'll shortly release the registration form. Whoever wants to join, please can join. And thank you so much for teaching us this weekend.
Thank you.
Please everyone stand up. Let's keep this practice that when Venerable stands up, we only 1 minute.